Single dad got arrested defending a woman from thugs. She owned every bank in the state. He thought he was saving a stranger, but when the cuffs snapped and the truth hit, the broke mechanic realized he just changed the life of the most powerful woman in America forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn sun hadn't yet risen when Ethan Walker's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. His calloused hand reached out from beneath worn quilts to silence it. The familiar scent of motor oil clung to his skin despite last night's shower, a permanent reminder of long hours at the shop. Through the thin walls of their modest ranch house, he heard Lily moving around in the kitchen. That girl was always up before him these days, trying to shoulder more than any 16-year-old should. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he sat up, running a hand through his graying hair. "Morning, Dad." Lily's cheerful voice carried down the hallway. "Coffee's almost ready." "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart," Ethan called back, but warmth filled his chest. She was so much like her mother, always thinking of others first. He pulled on his work clothes, faded jeans, a thermal shirt, and the heavy canvas jacket with Walker's Auto Repair stitched across the back. The mirror showed tired lines around his eyes, but he pushed aside the weariness. Bills wouldn't pay themselves. The kitchen was bright with morning activity. Lily stood at the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, already dressed for school in jeans and a purple sweater. She'd laid out 2 bowls of oatmeal and was pouring coffee into his favorite chipped mug. "You should be sleeping in while you can," Ethan said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Your mom always said teenagers need more rest than old mechanics." A shadow flickered across Lily's face at the mention of her mother, but her smile quickly returned. "Someone has to make sure you eat breakfast. Besides, I have early band practice." They sat at their small kitchen table, morning sunlight starting to peek through worn curtains. The house was modest but clean. Pictures of happier times dotted the walls, most featuring a woman with Lily's smile and kind eyes. "Mrs. Henderson called yesterday." Lily mentioned between bites. "Her car's making that noise again." Ethan nodded, mentally adding it to his growing list of repairs. "I'll squeeze her in today. She's still paying off her husband's medical bills." "You're too nice sometimes, Dad. We need to pay our own bills too." "The Lord provides, Lily girl." He reached across to squeeze her hand. "Mrs. Henderson will pay what she can, when she can. Sometimes being kind matters more than being paid." Lily's eyes shone with pride, though worry creased her young forehead. "I know. I just wish." She trailed off, gathering their empty bowls. "Wish what, sweetheart?" "That you didn't have to work so hard. That things were easier." She rinsed the dishes quickly, checking the clock. "I should go. Band practice, remember?" Ethan stood, pulling her into a tight hug. She was getting so tall, nearly reaching his shoulder now. "Things are exactly as they should be. We've got each other, a roof over our heads, and honest work. That's more than many have." "Love you, Dad." She grabbed her backpack and band folder. "Love you too. Learned something amazing today." After Lily left, Ethan took his coffee to the front porch. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Across the street, porch lights still glowed as neighbors prepared for their day. Willow Creek was that kind of town, everyone knowing everyone, helping when they could. He started the 10-minute walk to his shop, hands in his pockets against the morning chill. The auto repair shop had been his father's before him, the faded sign now showing its age like everything else. But it was his. Mortgage nearly paid off after 15 years of monthly payments that sometimes meant skipping new clothes or eating simple meals. Inside, the familiar smell of oil and metal greeted him. Tools lined the walls in careful order, concrete floor swept clean despite constant grime. He flipped on the lights and started the coffee maker for customers who'd soon arrive with their troubled vehicles and tight budgets. The morning passed in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and friendly conversations. By afternoon, his hands were black with grease, shoulders aching from bending over engines. Mrs. Henderson's station wagon sat in Bay 3, timing belt finally fixed properly. "I can only pay half now," she'd said earlier, wringing her hands. "Maybe next month." "Take your time, Martha," he'd assured her. "That car needs to get you to work. We'll figure it out." Now, as evening approached, Ethan wiped his hands and began closing up. The sky had turned dusky purple, streetlights flickering on along Main Street. His body felt every one of his 47 years, every loss and struggle etched in tired muscles. Standing in the doorway of his shop, he looked up at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, reminding him of nights when he and Sarah would sit on their porch, dreaming of the future. He missed her most in these quiet moments. "Lord," he muttered softly, "just give me strength for one more day." The street lamps flickered to life as Ethan trudged past the abandoned train station. His work boots scraped against the cracked sidewalk, each step heavy after another 14-hour day at the shop. Wind whipped through the gaps in his worn denim jacket, and he turned up the collar, hunching his shoulders against the autumn chill. The old station loomed beside him, its brick walls dark with age and neglect. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth, and weeds pushed through the platform's concrete. 10 years ago, the place had still been running. Now it was just another reminder of how their small town was slowly fading away. His thoughts drifted to Lily, probably worried sick about him working late again. He'd promised to be home for dinner, but Mrs. Henderson's transmission had taken longer than expected. The extra hours meant more money for Lily's college fund, though. That thought kept his feet moving forward, one tired step after another. A sound cut through the wind's whistle, muffled voices from the alley between the station and the old hardware store. Ethan slowed his pace. Something about those voices made the hair on his neck stand up. "Please, just take it. Take everything." A woman's voice, tight with fear. "Shut up." A younger voice, trying to sound tough but wavering with nervous energy. Ethan stopped at the alley's entrance. In the dim light, he made out 3 figures, a woman in business attire backed against the brick wall, and 2 men. No, not men, boys, really. Probably not much older than 19 or 20. One held something that glinted dully, a knife or pipe. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to keep walking, to not get involved. He had Lily to think about. But then the woman let out a choked sob, and his feet were moving before his mind could catch up. "Hey!" His voice came out deeper than usual, filling the narrow space. "Leave her alone." The 2 young men spun around. The woman's eyes went wide. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. She clutched an expensive-looking purse to her chest. "Mind your own business, old man," the taller one snarled. In his hand, Ethan now clearly saw a length of pipe. "This is my business." Ethan stepped closer, hands raised but ready. "You boys don't want to do this. Just walk away." The shorter one laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You're the one who needs to walk away. Last warning." Ethan had faced down enough bullies in his life to recognize false bravado. These weren't hardened criminals, just scared kids making terrible choices, but scared. People were dangerous people. "Ma'am," he said quietly, eyes never leaving the boys. "When you get the chance, run. Don't look back." The tall one lunged forward, pipe whistling through the air. Ethan's body responded with muscle memory from his high school wrestling days. He stepped inside the swing, deflecting the pipe with his forearm. Pain shot through his arm, but adrenaline dulled it to a distant throb. The shorter one came at him with wild punches. Ethan blocked one, took another to the ribs. He grabbed the boy's jacket and used his momentum to spin him into his partner. They collided with a grunt. "Run!" he shouted to the woman. She bolted past them, heels clicking against pavement. The tall one recovered, swinging the pipe again. This time, when Ethan deflected it, the force sent the weapon clattering against brick. The boy stumbled, off balance. Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, and the young man dropped like a stone. Distant sirens pierced the air. The shorter attacker took one look at his unconscious friend and fled down the alley. Ethan's chest heaved as he stood over the fallen youth. Blood trickled from the boy's split lip. The sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights painted the alley walls in alternating colors. Hands where we can see them. Ethan slowly raised his hands, turning to face 2 officers with drawn weapons. Their flashlight beams blinded him. "On your knees," he complied, wincing as his knees hit concrete. Cold metal snapped around his wrists as they cuffed him. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights washed over him as reality set in. The woman was gone. The conscious attacker had fled. All the police saw was an unconscious kid and a middle-aged man with bloody knuckles. They led him toward the patrol car, past curious onlookers gathering at the alley's entrance. His shoulder slammed against the car's frame as they pushed him into the back seat. Through the window, Ethan watched his world narrow to flashing lights and shadows. His heart sank as he thought of Lily, waiting at home, not knowing where her father was. "Not again," he thought. "Please, God, not again." The car door slammed shut with the finality of a prison cell. The holding cell's concrete walls pressed in around Ethan like the jaws of some mechanical vice, cold and unforgiving in the pre-dawn darkness that seemed to seep from every corner. His back ached against the metal bench, each vertebra protesting hours of sitting on the unforgiving surface. The sharp smell of industrial disinfectant burned his nostrils, but it could barely mask the deeper odors that had soaked into these walls over the years: sweat, fear, desperation, and the sour tang of too many broken dreams. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp, its flickering glow casting harsh, shifting shadows across the faces of three other men sharing his temporary prison. The intermittent electrical hum seemed to match the rhythm of his headache, each pulse sending fresh waves of pain through his skull. His fingers gingerly explored the swelling around his left eye, wincing as they found tender spots where the skin had already begun to darken. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off hours ago, leaving behind a symphony of aches. His knuckles scraped raw, his ribs tender where someone's elbow had found its mark, and a persistent throb in his shoulder from when he'd hit the alley wall. But it wasn't his injuries that carved the deepest wound in his chest. It was the thought of Lily, alone at home, probably pacing their small living room and watching the clock, sick with the kind of worry that no 16-year-old should have to carry. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the harsh fluorescent glare, but the memories came flooding back anyway. The woman's muffled cries for help echoing off the brick walls. The predatory circle of figures closing in on her, the glint of streetlight on polished metal. Was it a pipe? A knife? His body had moved before his mind could catch up, decades of mechanical work lending unexpected strength to his hands as he deflected the blow meant for her head. The sickening thud as one of the attackers hit the pavement, blood pooling beneath his skull. Then the strobing police lights painting everything in alternating red and blue, the shouted commands, the confusion, and the woman, his victim, the person he'd risked everything to save, disappearing into the maze of shadows before she could explain what had really happened. The irony tasted bitter in his mouth. He'd spent 10 years rebuilding his life, brick by careful brick, proving to Lily and to himself that he could be the father she deserved. One moment of doing what felt right, and it might all crumble again. "Hey, old-timer." A raspy voice cut through his thoughts like a rusty blade. "What are you in for?" Ethan looked up to see one of his cellmates watching him with dark amusement. The man was lanky as a scarecrow, with tattoos crawling up his neck like thorny vines. Skulls, serpents, and words in languages Ethan couldn't read. His teeth were stained yellow, and there was a meanness in his eyes that spoke of too many nights in places like this. "Trying to help someone?" Ethan answered quietly, his voice rough from hours of silence and the taste of his own fear. The tattooed man barked out a laugh that echoed off the concrete walls, harsh and grating. "Oh man, we got ourselves a real hero here, boys." He elbowed his companion, a heavy-set man with a gray beard who hadn't stopped snoring since Ethan arrived. The sleeping man grunted but didn't wake. "Bet that worked out real well for you, didn't it, Superman?" Ethan said nothing, turning his gaze to the small window near the ceiling. It was barely larger than a shoebox, crisscrossed with thick metal bars that cast prison-striped shadows on the opposite wall. The first hints of dawn were starting to creep across the sky outside, pale, gray light filtering through the glass like hope trying to squeeze through a crack in the world. "Let me guess," the tattooed man continued, clearly enjoying his captive audience. His voice carried the practiced cruelty of someone who'd learned to find entertainment in others' misery. "Saw something you shouldn't have, tried to play the Good Samaritan, and now you're sitting here in the county's finest accommodations while the bad guys are probably having pancakes at some nice diner." He clicked his tongue with mock sympathy. "That's what you get for sticking your nose where it don't belong, hero. World's got no use for guys like you anymore." The words stung because they carried more than a grain of truth. Here he was, locked up like a common criminal, while Lily was probably standing at their kitchen window, watching for headlights that wouldn't come. She'd be wondering if this was it, if her father had finally stumbled back into the darkness that had nearly swallowed him whole after her mother's death. The thought made his stomach clench like a fist around broken glass. Another inmate spoke up from the far corner of the cell. He was younger, maybe 25, with hollow eyes that had seen too much too soon and the pale, drawn features of someone who'd been living on the streets. "World ain't kind to heroes these days, Pops. Better to keep your head down, mind your own business, and let everybody else figure out their own problems." That's Survival 101. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His work boots were scuffed and dirty from the scuffle, and there were dark stains on his jeans that might have been blood. The concrete floor beneath his feet was a patchwork of stains, some old, some fresh, all telling stories he didn't want to imagine. In the distance, beyond the thick walls and locked doors, he could hear the sounds of the jail coming to life. The metallic clang of cell doors opening and closing, the echo of footsteps in long corridors, the murmur of officers changing shifts. Somewhere in this maze of concrete and steel, other men were facing their own reckonings. "Lord," he whispered, so quietly that only he could hear the words, his voice barely more than a breath. "I know I'm not much, never have been. Just a broken-down mechanic with grease under his fingernails and more regrets than sense." His hands clasped together, knuckles white with the force of his grip. "But please, watch over my little girl. Keep her safe until I can get back to her. Give her strength to face whatever comes next." The words caught in his throat. "And if this is where my story ends, if this is how it all falls apart again, just don't let her lose faith. In you, in herself, in the good that's still out there, even when it's hard to see." The tattooed man made a sound of disgust, like he tasted something sour. "Great, a Jesus freak. That's all we need in here. Next thing you know, he'll be trying to save our souls too." He spat on the floor, the sound echoing in the small space. Hours crawled by like wounded animals, each minute an eternity of waiting and worry. Ethan watched the pale rectangle of light from the window creep across the floor with agonizing slowness, marking time's passage like a sundial made of shadows and regret. His body settled into a dull ache that seemed to seep into his bones, but his heart carried a sharper pain. Lily would be waking up soon. If she'd managed to sleep at all, she'd pad down the hallway in her worn slippers, check his room out of habit, and find his bed empty, the covers still neat and untouched. That old fear would come flooding back, the same terror that had lived in her eyes during his drinking days, when she never knew if Daddy would come home or if he'd be lost forever in the bottom of a bottle. The memory of those dark months still haunted him. Lily, barely 7 years old, learning to make her own breakfast because he couldn't get out of bed. Coming home from school to find him passed out on the couch, empty beer cans scattered around him like evidence of his failure. The night she'd called Mrs. Patterson from next door because she couldn't wake him up and thought he might be dead. The look in her eyes when the police had taken him away after the DUI, not anger, not disappointment, but something worse, resignation, as if she'd already accepted that everyone she loved would eventually leave her. The sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor broke through his spiraling thoughts, sharp and purposeful against the concrete floor. Keys jingled with metallic music, and a uniformed guard appeared at the cell door, his face impassive behind wire-rimmed glasses. Behind him stood a woman Ethan couldn't quite see clearly through the bars and shadows, but her voice cut through the morning silence like a blade through silk. Clear, authoritative, and somehow familiar. "Mr. Walker, you're being released." The fluorescent lights of the precinct lobby hit Ethan's eyes like needles after the dimness of the holding cell. He squinted, his bruised face aching as he followed the guard through a set of heavy doors. The sudden burst of camera flashes nearly knocked him backward. "Mr. Walker, over here! Can you tell us what happened in that alley? Were you afraid for your life?" A cluster of reporters pressed forward, microphones thrust toward him like accusing fingers. Ethan's hands instinctively went to his worn jacket, trying to smooth wrinkles that had set in during his night on the metal bench. His work boots scraped against the polished floor as he took an uncertain step back. I don't understand," he mumbled, more to himself than the cameras. "Mr. Walker." A clear, confident voice cut through the chaos. Ethan turned to see a woman in an elegant charcoal suit making her way through the crowd. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the early hour, she carried herself with perfect composure. Behind her, a man in an expensive suit clutched a leather briefcase, clearly a lawyer. It took Ethan a moment to recognize her without the fear in her eyes, without the shadows of the alley distorting her features. But there was no mistaking it. This was the woman he'd helped last night. "Miss Hayes?" The lawyer began, but she held up a hand to silence him. "Mr. Walker," she said again, stepping closer. Her eyes were kind, but carried a weight of authority that made the reporters fall quiet. "I want to thank you properly for what you did last night. You saved my life." The camera started clicking again, rapid fire. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I just did what anyone would have. No, she cut in firmly. You didn't. 2 men attacked me with clear intent to harm. Others passed by. You were the only one who stopped. She turned to face the cameras directly. Let me be absolutely clear about what happened. This man put himself in danger to protect a stranger. He showed remarkable courage and restraint, and he prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. One of the reporters pushed forward, recognition dawning on his face. Wait, you're Charlotte Hayes? Charlotte Hayes of Hayes Community Banks? The room erupted again. Miss Hayes, is it true your company controls over 60% of community banking in the state? Were you targeted because of your position? Is this connected to the recent merger talks? Charlotte remained perfectly composed, but Ethan noticed her hands tighten slightly on her purse strap, the only sign that the attention bothered her. I'm not discussing business matters, she said firmly. I'm here because an innocent man spent the night in jail for protecting me. That's being rectified now. She turned back to Ethan. The charges have been dropped completely. My lawyer has all the paperwork processed. Ethan's head spun. The woman he'd helped wasn't just some random person. She was practically banking royalty in their state. Hayes Community Banks were everywhere, their logo as familiar as traffic lights on every main street. He'd even gotten his truck loan through them years ago. Mr. Walker, another reporter shouldered forward. You're a mechanic, correct? Did you have any idea who Miss Hayes was when you intervened? Ethan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. No, ma'am, He paused, choosing his words carefully. I heard someone who needed help. That's all that mattered. Charlotte's expression softened at his words. That's exactly why we need to share this story, she said to the cameras. In a world where it's easier to look away, Mr. Walker chose to help. That's the kind of community spirit our banks were founded on. The lawyer finally stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor. Miss Hayes has taken care of all legal expenses in compensation for Mr. Walker's time and distress. We'll be releasing an official statement later today. For now, we ask that you respect both parties' privacy. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The lawyer pressed papers into Ethan's hands, explaining things about liability releases and settlement agreements. Charlotte Hayes shook his hand, her grip surprisingly firm, and thanked him once more before being whisked away by what looked like security personnel. When Ethan finally made it to his truck in the precinct parking lot, his hands were shaking slightly as he turned the key. The old engine coughed to life, the familiar rumble helping to ground him back in reality. He pulled out onto the street just as the morning rush was beginning. His phone started buzzing before he'd gone 3 blocks. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store, Tom from the hardware shop. Even Pastor Mike's number flashed across the screen. Each call went to voicemail as Ethan kept his eyes firmly on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At a red light, he glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror. A tired, bruised face stared back at him. Just a mechanic, he thought. Just a mechanic who'd somehow gotten tangled up in something much bigger than himself. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from his neighbor, Martha. Ethan Walker, you're all over the morning news. Call me when you get home. Lily's fine. She stayed with us last night. But you've got some explaining to do, young man. The light turned green, and Ethan pressed the gas pedal, eager to get home. The familiar streets of his small town seemed different somehow. People on the sidewalks were pointing. Storefront TVs showed glimpses of the press conference he'd just left behind. His quiet life had suddenly become very, very public. The phone kept buzzing as he drove, each new call or message making him more aware of how quickly everything was changing. The morning sun caught his rearview mirror, momentarily blinding him, and he couldn't help but wonder if this sudden spotlight would bring more light or heat into his carefully balanced world. The morning sun streamed through the small kitchen window of the Walker home, catching the steam rising from a pot of instant coffee. Lily sat at their worn wooden table, practically bouncing in her chair as she held up her phone, showing her father yet another news article about last night's events. Dad, you're trending. Look at all these comments. Everyone's calling you a hero. Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement as she scrolled through the endless stream of social media posts. Ethan hunched over his coffee mug, his work shirt already carrying traces of motor oil from an early morning emergency repair. Honey, please. It's not that big a deal. He winced as he shifted in his chair, his ribs still sore from the scuffle. Not a big deal? Lily's voice rose an octave. You saved Charlotte Hayes. Do you know who she is? She owns like half the banks in the state. She pushed her cereal bowl aside to make room for the morning newspaper she'd retrieved from their front step. There it was, right on the front page. Local mechanic saves banking heiress. I did what anyone would have done, Ethan mumbled, taking another sip of coffee. His eyes drifted to the stack of bills by the toaster, each envelope marked with red final notice stamps that seemed to mock him. That's not true, Dad. Most people would have walked right by. You didn't. Lily's voice softened as she reached across the table to touch his hand. Mom would be proud. Ethan's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. He squeezed Lily's hand back, managing a small smile. You better get ready for school, kiddo. Bus will be here soon. Just then, his phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Ethan almost let it go to voicemail, probably another reporter, but something made him answer. Mr. Walker? The voice was calm, refined, and somehow familiar. This is Charlotte Hayes. Ethan sat up straighter, catching Lily's wide-eyed stare. Miss Hayes, I wasn't expecting. Please, call me Charlotte. There was warmth in her tone. I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to speak with you about an opportunity. Ethan listened as Charlotte outlined her proposal. She needed someone to oversee maintenance for her company's fleet of vehicles, dozens of cars spread across multiple branches. The salary she mentioned made his coffee cup pause halfway to his mouth. That's very generous, he said carefully, watching Lily's expectant face across the table. But I have my own shop here. My customers depend on me. You could keep your shop, Charlotte replied. This would be additional work, on your own schedule. Mr. Walker, Ethan, what you did for me, I want to repay that somehow. Ma'am, I didn't help you to get anything in return. His eyes fell on another bill, this one for Lily's upcoming school expenses. I know that, Charlotte said softly. That's exactly why I'm offering. People like you are rare, Mr. Walker. I need someone I can trust. Ethan rubbed his temples. I appreciate it, but I can't accept charity. This isn't charity. It's a job offer based on merit. Sleep on it, please? After saying goodbye, Ethan set the phone down. Lily was practically vibrating with anticipation. Well, what did she say? What are you going to do? Nothing to do, Ethan said, standing to rinse his cup. I've got my shop. We're doing fine. Lily's face fell. Dad, no. The shop's barely breaking even. I know because I help with the books, remember? She followed him to the sink. And don't tell me we're doing fine. I saw the past due notice for the rent. Lily, Ethan's voice held a warning note. No, listen. She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. I know you're proud. Mom always said it was one of your best and worst qualities. But sometimes, her voice caught. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to accept help. Ethan stared at his daughter, so much like her mother, with that same quiet wisdom that could cut right through his defenses. The morning light caught the worry in her eyes, making her look older than her 16 years. He leaned against the counter. I don't want to be beholden to anyone. Why not? Lily challenged. You help people all the time. Remember when you fixed Mr. Peterson's truck for free because his wife was sick? Or when you stayed late to help Mrs. Rodriguez with her flat tire? Why is it okay for you to help others, but not okay for someone to help you? The truth of her words hit him hard. He thought about all the times he'd told Lily that pride shouldn't stop someone from doing the right thing. Was he being a hypocrite now? The phone buzzed again, a text from Charlotte with her office number, asking him to at least come in for a proper discussion. Ethan looked at his daughter, then at the bills on the counter, then back at his phone. The weight of responsibility, to his child, to his customers, to his own conscience, pressed down on him. Finally, he let out a long breath. Maybe, I'll just talk to her once. Lily's face lit up with hope. Really? Just to talk, he emphasized, but couldn't help smiling at her excitement. No promises beyond that. Lily threw her arms around him, careful of his sore ribs. That's all I'm asking, Dad. Just talk to her. The morning sun grew stronger, warming the small kitchen, and for the first time in a while, Ethan felt something else warm inside him too, a cautious spark of possibility. Ethan's old pickup truck looked comically out of place among the gleaming luxury vehicles in the Hayes Financial Tower parking garage. He pulled into a visitor spot, the truck's engine echoing off concrete walls that probably cost more than his house. His weathered work boots scuffed against the spotless floor as he made his way to the elevator. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all soaring glass, polished marble, and chrome. Well-dressed professionals hurried past, their shoes clicking importantly on the floor. Ethan's canvas jacket and honest face drew curious glances from security guards and receptionists. "I'm here to see Charlotte Hayes," he said quietly to the front desk attendant, feeling like an intruder in this pristine space. "Ethan Walker." The young woman's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Walker, yes. Miss Hayes is expecting you. Please take the executive elevator to the 42nd floor." She handed him a visitor badge with efficient grace. The elevator rode smoother than any car he'd ever fixed. Ethan watched floor numbers tick by, his reflection in the mirrored walls showing a man who looked as uncomfortable as he felt. His bruises from the alley fight were still visible, a reminder of how he'd ended up here. The elevator opened directly into a reception area where a sharp-dressed assistant sat behind a curved desk. "Mr. Walker?" She greeted him with a warm smile. "Please, go right in. Miss Hayes is waiting." Charlotte's office was larger than Ethan's entire garage. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. Modern art adorned the walls, and a massive desk of dark wood anchored the space. But what struck him most was Charlotte herself. She looked different here than she had at the police station, more composed, yet somehow more real. She rose from her desk with a genuine smile. "Ethan, thank you for coming." She gestured to a comfortable chair. "Please, sit." He perched carefully on the edge of the leather seat, hyper-aware of his work-worn hands and the engine grease that never quite seemed to wash away. "Miss Hayes. Charlotte, please." "Charlotte." He corrected himself. "I appreciate you seeing me, but I want to be clear. I'm not looking for charity or special treatment." She sat back down, studying him with intelligent eyes. "Good, 'cause I'm not offering any. What I'm offering is a job that needs doing, and from what I've learned about you, you're exactly the right person to do it." She pulled out a folder and opened it on her desk. "Hayes Financial maintains a fleet of company vehicles, executive cars, courier vans, maintenance trucks. We currently contract out all the maintenance and repairs to various shops across the city. It's inefficient and expensive." She looked up at him. "I want to bring it in-house, build our own service center. We need someone who knows vehicles inside and out, someone who can manage both machines and people with integrity." Ethan shifted in his chair. "That's a big operation." "It is," Charlotte agreed, "and it needs someone with real experience, not just technical knowledge. Someone who understands the value of honest work." She paused, then added softly, "Someone who would step into a dark alley to help a stranger without thinking twice." He felt his face flush. "Anyone would have—" "No," she cut him off gently. "They wouldn't have. Trust me, I know people, Ethan. I deal with them every day. What you did was extraordinary, not because it was heroic, but because it was instinctive. That kind of character is rare, especially in this building." She slid a document across the desk. "This is a proposal for a 3-month trial position. You'd oversee the planning and initial setup of the service center while handling our most urgent maintenance needs. After 3 months, we evaluate how it's working for both of us." She met his eyes directly. "This isn't charity, Ethan. This is business." "Good business." Ethan picked up the paper, his mechanic's hands careful not to smudge the crisp white pages. The salary figure made his breath catch. It was more than triple what he made at his shop. "I know it's a big change," Charlotte said, reading his expression. "But sometimes life puts opportunities in our path for a reason. All we have to do is be brave enough to take them." He thought of Lily, of bills piling up, of prayers for just one more day of strength. Maybe this was the answer to those prayers, coming in an unexpected package. 3 months, he said finally, looking up. "Trial basis." Charlotte's smile was warm and genuine. "Trial basis?" She agreed, holding out her hand. They shook on it, his callous palm meeting her smoother one in a grip that was firm and honest on both sides. As Ethan rode the elevator back down, his visitor badge still pinned to his jacket, he felt like he was straddling 2 worlds, the familiar grip of wrenches and engine oil, and this new realm of corporate towers and opportunity. He wasn't sure if they could be bridged, but for Lily's sake, he had to try. Charlotte watched through her office windows as Ethan's old pickup pulled out of the parking garage. Her assistant, Margaret, came in with the day's schedule. "There's something about that man's sincerity," Charlotte mused, still watching the truck until it disappeared into traffic. Rare these days. The corporate garage gleamed like no repair shop Ethan had ever seen. Polished concrete, floors reflected fluorescent lights, and neat rows of diagnostic equipment lined the walls. The smell was different too, less grease and rubber, more air freshener and new car leather. A group of mechanics in crisp Navy uniforms huddled near a lifted Mercedes, their conversation dying as Ethan approached. He wore his own clean work shirt, the name Walker embroidered above the pocket in fading thread. "Well, look who it is, the hero of Hayes Financial," one of them called out, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Come to grace us with your presence?" "Just here to work," Ethan said quietly, setting his toolbox down at an empty workstation. The metal clang echoed through the garage. The lead mechanic, a man with salt and pepper hair named Marcus, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Since you're the new hotshot, maybe you'd like to take a look at this." He gestured to a black company SUV parked in the corner. "Been giving us fits for weeks. Engine dies at random, no diagnostic codes." Ethan nodded, already moving toward the vehicle. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to fail. The pressure sat heavy on his shoulders, but he dealt with worse. Much worse. For the next hour, Ethan methodically worked through his inspection. He checked connections, tested sensors, and traced wiring harnesses while the other mechanics went about their business, occasionally throwing glances his way. His hands moved with a certainty that came from decades of experience, each motion purposeful and precise. The problem revealed itself in a corroded ground wire hidden behind the transmission, the kind of issue that wouldn't show up on computer diagnostics. As Ethan cleaned the connection and replaced the wire, he heard the distinct click of heels on concrete. Charlotte Hayes stood at the garage entrance, elegant in her charcoal business suit. She watched as Ethan closed the hood and started the engine. It purred to life, running smoother than it had in months. "Impressive," she said, walking over. "Marcus told me that vehicle was headed for the auction block." The other mechanics gathered around, their skepticism giving way to reluctant respect as Ethan explained the fix. It wasn't flashy or complicated, just careful observation and old-school know-how. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one," Ethan said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Just takes patience to find it." Charlotte's smile carried genuine warmth. "That's exactly the kind of wisdom we need around here, mister." "Walker." She turned to address the whole team. "I hope you'll all make him feel welcome." As she left, Ethan noticed the shift in the atmosphere. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, and someone offered him coffee. By lunch, he was part of their technical discussions, his experience valued rather than mocked. The day passed quickly after that. Ethan lost himself in the work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of repairs and maintenance. When his shift ended, he felt cautiously optimistic about this new chapter in his life. That feeling lasted until he got home. Lily was waiting at the kitchen table, her laptop open and her face pale. "Dad," she said softly, "you need to see this." The local news website filled the screen. Below a bold headline about Hayes Financial's new hire was a smaller story. "Hero Mechanics Past Revealed, DUI Arrest Surfaces." Ethan sank into a chair, his legs suddenly weak. The article detailed his arrest from 8 years ago, complete with his mugshot from that terrible night. He'd been drinking heavily then, lost in grief over Sarah's death, until the wake-up call of nearly hitting another car shocked him sober. He'd done his time, paid his fines, and rebuilt his life for Lily's sake. But seeing it splashed across the screen brought all the shame rushing back. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Lily whispered, reaching for his hand. "It's not fair. You've changed so much since then." Ethan couldn't speak. He got up and poured coffee from the pot he'd left warming that morning, though he had no appetite for it now. The mug trembled slightly in his weathered hands as he stared at the dark liquid, seeing instead the reflection of the man he'd been, and praying he wouldn't become again. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Outside, a dog barked, and cars passed on their way to better places. Ethan sat there, his coffee growing cold, wondering if he'd just lost everything he'd worked so hard to rebuild. His phone lay silent on the table. Soon, he knew, it would ring. Charlotte or her HR department would have seen the story by now. The thought of facing them tomorrow made his stomach churn. But it was the memory of Sarah's disappointment and Lily's fierce love that made his hands shake the most. The morning sun cast long shadows through the corporate garage's windows, but they weren't half as dark as the looks Ethan received from his coworkers. He kept his head down, focusing on the engine before him, but couldn't ignore the hushed conversations that stopped whenever he walked past. At his workbench, a newspaper lay folded open to page 3. The headline made his stomach clench. Hayes Corp's new hire, a troubled past. Someone had circled his old DUI charge in red marker. Just ignore it, he muttered to himself, reaching for a wrench. His hands were steady, they always were when working on engines, but his mind raced with memories he'd tried so hard to forget. The darkness after Sarah's death, the bottles that couldn't numb the pain, that one terrible night, the garage door's hydraulic whoosh interrupted his thoughts. Charlotte Hayes strode in, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Even in her elegant gray suit, she moved with purpose through the automotive workspace. Behind her trailed 3 men in expensive suits, their faces pinched with concern. "Miss Hayes." One called out, "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. We really must." "Then we'll be brief," Charlotte cut him off, her voice firm but controlled. She approached Ethan's workstation. "Mr. Walker, could you join me in my office?" Ethan wiped his hands on a shop rag, noticing how the other mechanics had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring now. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent and tense. Charlotte's assistants shuffled papers nervously while shooting glances between their boss and the mechanic who stood apart from them, his work clothes a stark contrast to their business attire. In Charlotte's office, morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the city sprawled below. She closed the door, leaving her anxious entourage outside. "The board is demanding your termination," she said without preamble, turning to face him. "They're concerned about public image, shareholders, the usual corporate nonsense." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll clean out my locker." "I'm not firing you," Charlotte interrupted. Her blue eyes held his steadily. "But I am going to move you to our East Side branch. It's smaller, quieter, less scrutiny. Miss Hayes, Charlotte, please." "Charlotte," he corrected himself. "You don't have to protect me. That DUI. It's true. After my wife died, I made some bad choices. I won't deny it." She walked to her desk, picking up the morning paper. 7 years ago, one incident, followed by voluntary rehab, counseling, and a perfect record since. She tossed the paper into a recycling bin. "That's not a scandal, Mr. Walker. That's redemption." Before Ethan could respond, a sharp knock preceded one of the board members entering without waiting for permission. "Miss Hayes, the board is waiting." "And they're quite insistent." "Then let's not keep them waiting any longer." Charlotte straightened her jacket and headed for the door. She paused beside Ethan. "Would you mind joining us?" The boardroom fell silent as Charlotte entered with Ethan behind her. 24 faces turned to stare, some curious, others openly hostile. Ethan had never felt more out of place in his life. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charlotte began, standing at the head of the long table, "I understand your concerns about Mr. Walker's employment here. So let me be clear. This man saved my life at risk to his own. When he found me in that alley, he didn't ask for my net worth or check my credit score. He saw someone in need and acted." She placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "You're worried about our image? Well, I'm more worried about our soul. What does it say about Hayes Community Banks if we abandon someone for having a past? Especially someone who's worked so hard to overcome it? Miss Hayes?" One board member interjected, "The shareholders will understand that we practice what we preach about second chances and community values." Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Mr. Walker stays. That's final." Later, standing outside the gleaming corporate building, Ethan watched traffic flow past on the busy street. Charlotte emerged from the revolving doors, pausing beside him. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She smiled, a gentle expression that softened her professional demeanor. "Maybe I needed to." Ethan saw something in her eyes, then not pity or charity, but understanding. Maybe they were both fighting their own battles with the past. The East Side branch could use someone with your skills. She continued, "The fleet there hasn't had proper maintenance in months. Think you can handle it?" He nodded, feeling something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "Yes, ma'am, I can handle it." "Good." She checked her watch. "I have another meeting. The transfer papers will be ready tomorrow." She started to walk away, then turned back. "And Mr. Walker, thank you for reminding me what this company is supposed to stand for." Ethan watched her disappear back into the building, then pulled out his phone to call Lily. Maybe tonight they'd have something to celebrate after all. The autumn breeze carried the scent of motor oil and fresh coffee across the church parking lot. Ethan wiped his hands on a red shop rag, surveying the line of cars that stretched around the block. Single mothers from all over Willow Creek had brought their vehicles, responding to the flyers he'd posted around town advertising free repairs. His co-workers from Hayes Automotive, the same ones who'd initially given him cold shoulders, now stood beside him, rolling up their sleeves. Mike, the lead technician who'd once mocked him as the hero, was already underneath a battered minivan, calling out for tools. "Pass me that socket wrench, Walker," Mike said, his voice echoing from beneath the vehicle. "This lady's transmission mount is shot." Ethan handed him the tool, smiling at how things had changed. Over the past few weeks, his quiet competence and willingness to help others had gradually won them over. It started with small things, staying late to help Mike with a difficult repair, teaching the younger mechanics tricks he'd learned over decades of work. "How many more we got waiting?" asked Terry, another mechanic who'd volunteered his Saturday. Ethan checked his clipboard. 15 cars, mostly basic maintenance, but that blue Civic needs new brake pads. The church's ladies' auxiliary had set up a refreshment table, offering sandwiches and coffee to both the mechanics and the waiting families. Children played on the nearby playground while their mothers chatted, sharing stories and support. What no one noticed was the elegant woman in casual clothes who'd slipped quietly into the crowd. Charlotte Hayes had traded her usual designer suits for jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She stood near the refreshment table, watching the scene unfold with growing wonder. A young mother nearby bounced a fussy baby while talking to another woman. "I don't know what I would have done. This car's all I have to get to work, and I couldn't afford the repairs." Charlotte's throat tightened. These weren't just statistics on a spreadsheet or loan applications on her desk. These were real people, fighting real battles every day. Ethan spotted her as he walked to his toolbox. He paused, surprised, then gave her a small nod of recognition. She smiled back, grateful he didn't draw attention to her presence. Throughout the afternoon, Charlotte helped serve coffee and sandwiches, listening to stories from the community. Nobody recognized her as the banking CEO whose picture occasionally appeared in the business section. Here, she was just another pair of hands, another caring heart. As the sun began to set, the last car pulled away with fresh oil and new windshield wipers. The mechanics packed up their tools, tired but satisfied. Ethan's daughter Lily helped the church ladies clean up the refreshment table, boxes of leftover cookies tucked away for Sunday service. "Hey." Charlotte approached Ethan as he closed his toolbox. "That was something special today." "Just neighbors helping neighbors," he said, modest as always. Nothing fancy about it. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" she asked, gesturing to the diner across the street. "I could use someone to talk to." The bells above Joe's diner door chimed as they entered. The evening crowd was thin, just a couple of regulars at the counter and a tired-looking waitress refilling coffee cups. They slid into a booth by the window, where the neon sign cast a warm glow across the worn tabletop. "The usual, Ethan," called Rita, the waitress. "Thanks, Rita, and whatever my friend here would like." Charlotte ordered coffee, black, and waited until Rita had poured their cups before speaking. "I've been running banks for 5 years, she said softly, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Looking at numbers, making decisions that affect thousands of people. But today I actually saw those people." Ethan added a splash of cream to his coffee, giving her time to continue. "That mother with the minivan, she works 3 jobs. The woman with the Civic, she's putting herself through nursing school." Charlotte's voice wavered slightly. "I feel so disconnected most of the time. Like I'm living in this bubble of board meetings and quarterly reports." "It's easy to lose touch," Ethan said gently. "Happens to all of us sometimes, but you haven't." She looked at him intently. "You know everyone's story. You see what they need. Just doing what needs doing." He took a sip of coffee. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." Charlotte stared out the window at the darkening street. "I don't know where I fit anymore. The corporate world feels empty, but this," she gestured vaguely at the town around them, "this feels real." Ethan was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Then he said softly, "Maybe this is where God meant you to be." The simple statement hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of truth. Charlotte felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes, touched by the genuine acceptance in his voice. Outside, a train whistle echoed in the distance, and the diner's neon sign buzzed quietly. In this small-town diner, surrounded by the honest wear of daily life, Charlotte Hayes felt more at home than she had in years. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Hayes Community Bank's main branch, casting warm rectangles across the polished marble floor. Charlotte Hayes stood at a podium, her usual corporate attire softened by a gentle smile that reached her eyes. Before her, a small crowd of reporters and community members gathered, their attention fixed on the bank's normally reserved CEO. Today, Charlotte began, her voice clear and steady. I'm proud to announce something different, something that reminds us what community banking should truly mean. She glanced at Ethan, who stood quietly at the back of the room, his work shirt freshly pressed but still bearing traces of the morning's repairs. The Walker Fund for Families in Crisis isn't just another corporate initiative. It's inspired by someone who showed me what real community service looks like. Charlotte gestured toward Ethan, making him shift uncomfortably under the sudden attention. A man who, despite his own struggles, never stopped helping others. The fund will provide emergency assistance, small business support, and yes, even car repair grants to families facing unexpected hardships. In the front row, Lily Walker couldn't contain her smile. She reached for her father's hand as he made his way to stand beside her, his callous fingers wrapping protectively around hers. Pride radiated from her face as Charlotte continued describing the program's details. We're starting with $5 million, Charlotte announced, causing a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. And I'm pleased to say that Ethan Walker will help oversee the distribution committee, ensuring these funds reach the families who need them most. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. This was news to him. He felt Lily squeeze his hand encouragingly as reporters' cameras flashed. After the presentation, well-wishers surrounded them. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose minivan Ethan had fixed for free last month, hugged him tight. Now everyone knows what we've always known about you, Ethan, she said, wiping away happy tears. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his office at the corporate garage, staring at the fresh paint on the door that read E. Walker, Fleet Operations, and Community Services. The title still felt strange, like a suit that didn't quite fit. But as he reviewed applications for the fund's first round of assistance, something settled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Lily breezed in after school, dropping her backpack by his desk. Dad, you're all over social media. Look. She thrust her phone at him, showing posts praising the initiative. They're calling you the mechanic with a heart of gold. Ethan rubbed his neck, embarrassed. Just doing what needs doing, sweetie. No, Dad. Lily perched on his desk, her expression serious. You're doing more than that. You're showing people that second chances are real. She paused, her voice softening. Mom would be so proud. The mention of her mother made Ethan's throat tight. He touched the wedding ring he still wore, now sharing space with a small grease stain. A gentle knock interrupted their moment. Charlotte stood in the doorway, holding a cream-colored envelope. I hope I'm not interrupting? Miss Hayes. Ethan started to stand, but she waved him back down. Charlotte, please. We're well past formalities. She smiled warmly at Lily before turning back to Ethan. I actually came with an invitation. Every year, Hayes Community Banks hosts a gala honoring local heroes. This year, she extended the envelope to them. I'd very much like both of you to attend as our guests of honor. Lily practically bounced with excitement, but Ethan hesitated. I'm not much for fancy parties. Dad, Lily protested. Charlotte's eyes crinkled with understanding. It's not about the party, Ethan. It's about celebrating what you've inspired. Sometimes people need to see good things acknowledged. It gives them hope. Ethan looked at his daughter's pleading face, then back at the envelope. His fingers, still bearing traces of the day's work, carefully opened it. Inside was an elegantly printed invitation to the Hayes Community Heroes Gala. We'd be honored, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion, though I'll need to rent a suit. Already taken care of, Charlotte smiled. I hope you don't mind. I had my personal shopper set aside some options for both of you. Lily clapped her hands together. Can we go look now? Please, Dad? Ethan nodded, unable to stop his own smile as his daughter's enthusiasm filled the room. Charlotte watched them with barely concealed affection, her usual corporate reserve melting away. The fitting is scheduled for tomorrow at 3, she said. And Ethan? He looked up. Thank you for letting us celebrate this. Sometimes the best way to help others is to show them that good things are still possible. As Charlotte left, Ethan sat back in his chair, the invitation still in his hands. On his desk, applications for assistance waited to be reviewed. Through his window, he could see mechanics working on fleet vehicles, their movements now carrying a sense of purpose beyond mere repairs. For the first time in years, the weight of his past felt lighter. Not gone, he knew better than to expect that, but transformed into something that might help others find their way forward too. Dad? Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You okay? He smiled at his daughter, remembering all the nights she'd helped him hold on to hope. Yeah, sweetie, I really am. The Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom sparkled like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors, while waiters in crisp black ties weaved through clusters of guests in designer evening wear. Ethan Walker tugged uncomfortably at his borrowed suit collar, feeling like a fish out of water among the society elite. Stop fidgeting, Dad, Lily whispered, smoothing down her simple blue dress, the nicest one they owned. You look great. Ethan managed a small smile at his daughter, but his hands wouldn't stay still. The suit, borrowed from his brother-in-law, felt tight across his shoulders. His callous mechanic's hands seemed too rough for this glittering world of wealth and privilege. A couple in formal wear brushed past, giving him a curious glance, and he fought the urge to retreat to a corner. Mr. Walker! Charlotte's voice cut through his discomfort. She appeared beside them in an elegant black evening gown, though her warm smile remained unchanged from their coffee shop conversations. I'm so glad you both could make it. Miss Hayes. Ethan nodded, grateful for a familiar face. This is quite something. Please, it's Charlotte, she reminded him gently. And this gala has always been more about appearance than substance. Until tonight. She squeezed his arm reassuringly before being pulled away by some board members. Lily led her father to their assigned table near the front. Look, Dad, they even have little name cards with gold writing. As they settled in, Ethan noticed other guests from their neighborhood. Sarah from the diner, Bob, who ran the hardware store, even Pastor Mike. They all seemed equally amazed by the surroundings, but their presence made him feel less alone. The dinner passed in a blur of unfamiliar courses and polite conversation. Finally, Charlotte approached the podium, the room falling silent as spotlight illuminated her figure. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. For years, this annual gala has celebrated success, measured in profits and expansion. Tonight, we're redefining what success means. She paused, her eyes finding Ethan's across the room. A few months ago, a man I'd never met risked everything to help a stranger in danger. He didn't know who I was. He didn't stop to calculate the cost. He simply acted with courage and compassion. Ethan felt his cheeks warm as heads turned in his direction. Lily squeezed his hand under the table. That man was Ethan Walker, Charlotte continued, and his actions that night revealed something I'd forgotten in my years of running this bank. That true wealth lies not in our vaults, but in the hearts of people who choose to do right, even when it's hard. She gestured to a large screen behind her, where images began to appear. Ethan working on cars at the charity repair weekend, local families gathered outside the bank, children playing in front of newly renovated homes. Tonight, I'm proud to announce the Walker Fund for Families in Crisis. This initiative will provide emergency loans, financial counseling, and support services to families facing unexpected hardships. The fund starts with a $10 million commitment from Hayes Community Banks. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan sat frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was hearing. But more importantly, Charlotte added, her voice softening, this fund represents a return to our true purpose, being a cornerstone of hope in our communities. And for teaching me this lesson, I ask Ethan Walker to join me on stage. Lily gave him a gentle push. Go on, Dad. Ethan rose on unsteady legs, making his way to the podium. The spotlight felt hot on his face as Charlotte stepped aside to let him speak. He looked out at the sea of faces, then down at his daughter's beaming smile in the front row. I'm not one for speeches, he began haltingly. I'm just a mechanic who tries to do right by people. That's all any of us can do, really. Help each other when we can, how we can. He paused, gathering his thoughts. This fund, it's not about me. It's about all the families out there who just need a chance to get back on their feet. Sometimes, grace comes in the form of a helping hand when you least expect it. As he stepped back from the microphone, thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Charlotte hugged him briefly before he returned to his seat, his eyes misty. Lily leaned close, her voice thick with emotion. Mom would have been proud, she whispered. The words hit him like a physical force, and Ethan had to blink hard to keep his tears at bay. He wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, remembering how Sarah would have loved to see this moment. Their little girl grown so wise, their family struggles transformed into hope for others. A photographer approached their table. "Mr. Walker, Miss, Hayes requested a photo of you both for the press release." Charlotte joined them, standing between Ethan and Lily. The camera flashed, capturing their genuine smiles. Three people from different worlds, united by unexpected circumstances and shared purpose. In the corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a marble column, a journalist watched the scene intently, his expression cold as he tapped notes into his phone. But for now, the moment belonged to the warmth of redemption and the power of simple kindness to change lives. Lily squeezed her father's hand again as another round of applause filled the room. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of his past lifting, replaced by something that felt remarkably like hope. The morning sun filtered through Ethan's kitchen window, casting a warm glow that felt at odds with the knot forming in his stomach. He sat at his worn wooden table, coffee growing cold beside him as he stared at his phone screen in disbelief. Hero Mechanic's shady past exposed. The dark truth behind Charlotte Hayes' latest PR stunt? His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the article. They dug up everything. The DUI from 8 years ago, his night in jail after defending Charlotte, even old court documents from his darkest days after Sarah's death. The journalist had painted him as a violent drunk, masquerading as a hometown hero. The phone buzzed. Another notification, then another. His social media feeds were exploding with shares and comments. "Can't believe Hayes Banking would trust this guy. Once a drunk, always a drunk. What kind of role model gets behind the wheel intoxicated?" Ethan's chest tightened as he thought of Lily. She'd be waking up soon, checking her own phone. The thought made him sick. The kitchen radio droned in the background, local morning news. His heart stopped when he heard his name. Controversy surrounding Hayes Banking's latest community initiative. The Walker Fund, named after local mechanic Ethan Walker, faces scrutiny after revelations about Walker's criminal record. Hayes Banking shareholders expressed concern over the company's association with. He switched it off with shaking hands. More notifications. A text from his sister. "You okay?" Seeing all this stuff online. Another from his old pastor. "Praying for you, brother. Remember, David had his struggles too." The sharp ring of his landline made him jump. Charlotte's name flashed on the caller ID. He let it go to voicemail, unable to face her disappointment. Her message came through clear and professional, but he caught the strain in her voice. "Ethan, please call me. The board is meeting this morning. I need to speak with you before." He deleted it before finishing. Opening his laptop only made things worse. Local news sites had picked up the story. Comment sections overflowed with judgment and speculation. Someone had even posted old photos from Sarah's funeral when grief had left him hollow-eyed and unshaven. This is who Hayes Banking calls a hero? Lily's footsteps creaked on the stairs. Ethan quickly closed the laptop, but not before seeing a new headline. Hayes Banking stocks drop amid community hero scandal. "Dad?" Lily stood in the doorway, her phone clutched tight. Her eyes were red. Everyone at school is sharing these awful things. Ethan opened his arms and she fell into them, just like when she was little. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never wanted this to touch you." "It's not fair," she whispered against his shoulder. "They don't know you. They don't know how hard you fought to get better after Mom." A text alert cut through the moment. It was Pete from work. "Boss says take today off. Media camping outside the garage." Ethan held Lily tighter, remembering all those years ago. The grief counseling, the AA meetings, the slow climb back to being worthy of his daughter's trust. All that progress now reduced to clickbait and cruel comments. He glanced out the window. A news van crept past their house, camera pointing toward their porch. "You should stay home from school today," he told Lily softly. "I'll call you in sick." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "No, I won't hide. Mom always said Walker women don't run from storms." Pride mixed with heartache in Ethan's chest. When had his little girl grown so strong? The morning crawled by. Lily left for school, head held high. Ethan paced the house, ignoring calls from reporters. His phone kept buzzing with notifications until he couldn't take it anymore. With methodical movements, he opened each social media app. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. One by one, he deleted them all. The silence felt both heavy and cleansing. Charlotte called twice more. Both times, he watched the phone ring until it stopped. What could he say to her? He'd brought scandal to her doorstep, tainted her company's reputation, damaged the very initiative meant to help others. Around noon, he forced himself to step outside for the mail. The driveway looked empty without his work truck, still parked at the garage. The street was quiet now. News vans moved on to fresher stories. But he felt exposed, imagining judgment from behind every neighboring window. Standing there in the weak autumn sunlight, Ethan remembered the night of the gala, the lights, the applause, Lily's proud smile. For one shining moment, he'd believed he'd truly put the past behind him, that God had turned his struggles into something meaningful. He walked back inside, dropping the unopened mail on the counter. His reflection caught in the kitchen window. Same man as yesterday, same heart, same scars. But the world saw him differently now. "Guess I flew too close to the sun," he whispered to the empty house. The mahogany-lined boardroom on the 32nd floor of Hayesbank Tower felt more like a courtroom than a meeting space. Charlotte Hayes sat at the head of the long table, her back straight and her face composed despite the hostile energy radiating from the executives surrounding her. "This is a PR nightmare, Miss Hayes." Gerald Thompson, the head of marketing, jabbed his finger at the newspaper spread before him. "We need to act decisively. Cut ties with Walker immediately." Charlotte's fingers tightened around her pen, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Walker has proven himself to be an exemplary employee and a man of character." "Character?" Margaret Chen, the risk management director, let out a harsh laugh. "The man has a criminal record. Did you even read these reports? DUI, assault." "A DUI from 8 years ago, after losing his wife," Charlotte interrupted, her tone sharp. "And the assault charge was dropped because he was protecting me." "The public doesn't care about context," Gerald shot back. "They see a violent drunk working for Hayes Community Banks. Our stock has already dropped 3 points since this morning." The room fell silent as Thomas Bedford, the eldest board member, cleared his throat. He'd been Charlotte's father's friend and advisor for 30 years. "Charlotte, dear, we understand your personal gratitude to this man. But you have a responsibility to this institution, to your father's legacy." Charlotte felt her chest tighten at the mention of her father. She stood slowly, placing both palms flat on the polished table surface. "My father taught me that character matters more than appearance, that second chances are sacred." "Your father," Thomas said quietly, "would have protected the bank first." "Then perhaps," Charlotte replied, meeting each person's gaze around the table, "it's time we did things differently than my father would have." Several board members exchanged worried glances. Margaret gathered her papers with a disapproving frown. "We'll need to record our formal opposition to this decision. Do what you must." Charlotte remained standing as her executives filed out, their whispered conversations echoing their disapproval. Thomas was the last to leave. He paused at the door. "You're losing allies you can't afford to lose, Charlotte." She waited until the door clicked shut before sinking back into her chair, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability in the empty room. Across town, Ethan knelt beside a simple headstone, brushing away fallen leaves from the engraved name. Sarah Walker, beloved wife and mother. The autumn wind rustled through the cemetery's maple trees, scattering red and gold leaves across the peaceful grounds. "I messed up again, Sarah," he whispered, tracing the letters with his fingertip. "Thought I was finally doing something right. Making you proud." His voice caught. Making Lily proud. The headlines from that morning felt like they were burning a hole in his jacket pocket. 8 years of staying clean, of rebuilding his life piece by piece, and now everyone knew about his darkest days. The months after Sarah's death, when he tried to drown his grief in whiskey, culminating in that horrible night when he'd driven home drunk and gotten pulled over. "I haven't touched a drop since that night," he told the silent stone. "Haven't even wanted to, but now." He swallowed hard. "Now everyone's looking at me like I'm still that man, like I never changed." A drop of rain fell on the headstone, then another. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon was finally rolling in. Ethan stayed kneeling, letting the first drop soak into his jacket. "I promise you, Sarah, I'm staying clean. For Lily, for the man you always believed I could be." He pressed his palm flat against the cool stone. I wish you were here." You always knew what to say when everything felt impossible. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Ethan finally stood, his knees stiff from the cold ground. He took one last look at the headstone, at the name that still had the power to both heal and hurt his heart. "I love you," he whispered, then turned toward his truck. The rain was falling steadily now as he drove home, his headlights cutting through the growing darkness and the sheets of water. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as he navigated the familiar streets, past the shuttered storefronts where people who'd once smiled and waved now hurried past with averted eyes. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he drove through the storm, each flash of lightning illuminating a world that suddenly felt as hostile as it had in those first months after Sarah's death. But this time was different. This time he wasn't drowning in grief and whiskey. This time he had promises to keep. The evening news anchor's face filled the screen in Charlotte's office, his expression grave. Breaking news: Hayes Community Banks, the state's largest banking chain, is under federal investigation for alleged discriminatory lending practices dating back over a decade. Charlotte's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, dark liquid spilling across her pristine white desk calendar. The anchor continued, his words cutting through the stunned silence. Documents obtained by our investigative team suggest systematic denial of loans to minority communities under the leadership of the late Richard Hayes. The practices reportedly continued until his death 3 years ago, when his daughter, Charlotte Hayes, took control of the company. Footage played of people being turned away from bank branches, their faces drawn with disappointment. Charts and graphs flashed across the screen, showing stark disparities in loan approvals based on zip codes. Charlotte's phone buzzed incessantly. Text messages, emails, missed calls, all demanding answers she didn't have. Her hands shook as she tried to wipe up the spilled coffee, the paper towels tearing in her trembling fingers. "Miss Hayes?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. There's a situation developing outside." Charlotte walked to her office window, drawing back the curtain. Below, on the street that had always seemed so orderly and pristine, chaos was erupting. Protesters were gathering, their signs bobbing like angry waves against the building's glass facade. Hayes Banks, built on discrimination, one read. "Justice for our communities," declared another. Security guards rushed to establish a perimeter as news vans pulled up, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers seeking light. Camera flashes sparkled through the growing dusk. Her office door burst open. James Mitchell, the company's chief legal counsel, hurried in, his usually impeccable tie askew. "Charlotte, this is bad. Really bad. These allegations, they're not just noise, there's documentation." "Documentation?" Charlotte sank into her chair. "That's impossible. I've overseen every major decision since Father died." "These go back further," James said, spreading papers across her desk. "Your father's old partners are talking. Winston Green, Theodore Mills, they're claiming they warned him about these practices, but he buried their concerns. And now they're coming forward with proof." Charlotte's mind raced to the community outreach program she'd initiated, the Walker Fund, all her efforts to reshape the bank's image. "But we've changed. We've been approving loans across all demographics. Our community investment programs are being painted as a cover-up," James interrupted. "They're saying you knew about these historical practices and tried to paper over them instead of addressing them directly." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "And your association with Ethan Walker isn't helping." A commotion outside drew their attention. The crowd had grown larger, their chants now clearly audible through the thick windows. "Hayes Banks, time to pay. Economic justice, here to stay." Charlotte's phone rang. The board chairman. She let it go to voicemail, knowing what he would say. On her computer screen, email notifications continued to pile up. The company's social media feeds were flooding with angry comments. Old customers sharing stories of rejected loans, activists calling for boycotts. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, face pale. "Miss Hayes, there are reporters in the lobby. They're demanding a statement, and the protesters are blocking all the exits." James pulled up a chair, his legal pad covered in hasty notes. "Charlotte, we need to get ahead of this. The board is already talking about emergency measures. Your position as CEO could be at risk." On the TV, now muted but still playing, footage showed Ethan's arrest from the alley incident, followed by his old DUI photo. The caption read, "Hayes Banks' troubled hero, a pattern of poor judgment." Charlotte watched as security tried to disperse the growing crowd outside. These were her neighbors, her community, people she'd sworn to serve better than her father had. Now they stood against her, their trust shattered. James cleared his throat. "There's something else." He pulled out another document. "The board has drafted a statement. They want to announce a complete separation from Ethan Walker and the Walker Fund. They believe it's the only way to show we're serious about reform." Ethan has nothing to do with this, Charlotte protested, her voice cracking. He's one of the most honest, decent, it doesn't matter, James cut in gently. The public has connected him to you and you to these allegations. His past issues make him a liability we can't afford right now. He leaned forward, his expression grave. Charlotte, if you don't cut ties with Walker immediately, you'll lose everything. The board will move for a vote of no confidence. The banks, your position, your father's legacy, it will all be gone. Charlotte stared at the statement in front of her, the words blurring as tears threatened to form. Outside, the chants grew louder, and the weight of her father's sins pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. The autumn wind rustled through the maple trees lining Ethan's modest street as Charlotte's silver Mercedes pulled up to his small craftsman home. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, before she found the courage to step out. The porch light cast a warm glow across weathered steps that had seen better days. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. He'd been watching from the window, knowing this moment would come. His face was etched with understanding, though pain lingered in his eyes. "Come in," he said softly. "Lily just made some hot chocolate." Charlotte stepped inside, immediately enveloped by the warmth of their home. Family photos lined the walls, moments frozen in time, showing a younger Ethan with his late wife Lily growing from a toddler to a teenager. The house smelled of cinnamon and motor oil, an oddly comforting combination. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway, two steaming mugs in her hands. Her smile was gentle, knowing. "I made extra marshmallows," she said, offering one to Charlotte. "Dad says sweet things help with hard conversations." Charlotte's eyes welled up as she accepted the mug. "You're very wise for your age, Lily." They settled in the living room, Charlotte perched on the edge of their worn plaid couch, Ethan in his usual armchair. The TV murmured in the background, muted news coverage showing protesters outside Hayes Bank headquarters. "You don't have to say it," Ethan began, his voice rough. "I saw the news." Charlotte set her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "I fought them, Ethan. I fought so hard. But the board, they're threatening to remove me completely if I don't distance myself from everything." "From me?" Ethan said quietly. It wasn't a question. "The timing couldn't be worse," Charlotte continued, her professional facade cracking. "These allegations about my father's lending practices. They're looking for any excuse to discredit my leadership. They're saying my judgment is compromised because of our friendship." Lily moved to sit beside Charlotte, her young face full of concern. "But you're doing good things. The Walker Fund has already helped 3 families in our neighborhood." Charlotte reached for Lily's hand, squeezing it gently. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't enough in the corporate world. They're suspending all new community programs pending investigation. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his calloused hands clasped together, a man used to bearing heavy burdens. "You have to protect what your father built, Charlotte. I understand that. What my father built," Charlotte's voice cracked, "might have been built on discrimination and lies. I thought I could change things, make it right." "You did change things," Lily insisted, her eyes bright with tears. "You believed in Dad when nobody else would. You saw the good in people everyone else ignored." Charlotte stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, leaves skittered across the driveway in the growing darkness. "I have to suspend the Walker Fund, effective immediately, and I have to ask you to resign, Ethan. They're preparing severance papers." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Ethan's shoulders sagged, but he nodded slowly. "I figured as much. You're doing what you have to do." "It's not fair," Lily protested, but her father raised a hand. "Life rarely is, sweetheart. But Miss Hayes gave us something more valuable than money or a job. She gave us back our dignity for a while. That's worth more than any paycheck." Charlotte turned back to them, tears streaming freely now. "I'm so sorry. You deserve better than this." Lily stood and wrapped her arms around Charlotte in a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in my dad. For showing me what a strong woman looks like, maybe someday, when all this is over." Charlotte hugged her back tightly, unable to speak. When they separated, she wiped her eyes quickly, trying to regain composure. Ethan walked her to the door, their footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. At the threshold, Charlotte paused. "I never told you. That night in the alley, you saved more than my life, Ethan Walker. You reminded me what courage looks like." "You showed plenty of courage yourself," he replied softly. "Don't let them take that from you." They shared one last look, weighted with unspoken words and might-have-beens. Then Charlotte was gone, her car's taillights disappearing into the darkness. Ethan stood in the doorway long after she'd left, until Lily touched his arm. "Come on, Dad, let's make some dinner." But Ethan couldn't move just yet. He reached for the remote and unmuted the TV, where a news anchor was delivering the latest update. Hayes Community Bank CEO Charlotte Hayes has been temporarily suspended pending investigation into historical lending practices. The board has appointed an interim CEO while Ethan clicked off the TV, his chest tight. The empty house seemed to echo with loss as he muttered, "Maybe faith ain't enough this time." The morning sun cast long shadows across Miller's auto repair shop as Ethan methodically worked under the hood of an old Chevrolet. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, though his movements lacked their usual energy. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber brought little comfort these days. "Hey, mister." Walker, Tommy, the teenage apprentice, called out. "Want some coffee?" "Thanks, kid." Ethan managed a small smile, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. The local news played quietly on the small TV in the corner, showing footage of protesters outside Hayes Bank headquarters for the third day in a row. Ethan glanced at his phone during his break. The Walker Fund website showed the same message it had for days. Program temporarily suspended pending review. He'd helped 5 families get back on their feet before everything fell apart. Now their success stories were buried under an avalanche of scandal and suspicion. Across town, in her penthouse office, Charlotte Hayes sat alone in the growing darkness. She hadn't bothered turning on the lights as evening approached. Stacks of financial records and old company documents covered her desk, proof of her father's systematic discrimination against low-income families, spanning 2 decades. Her fingers traced the edge of a framed photo, her father standing proud at the bank's centennial celebration. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The man who'd taught her about business ethics had built his empire on broken dreams. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Hayes?" Security found another batch of letters. "Would you like me to screen them?" "Just leave them," Charlotte replied wearily. Most were hate mail nowadays, but she forced herself to read each one. It felt like penance. Hours passed. Charlotte mechanically sorted through the pile until a plain white envelope caught her eye. The handwriting was young, careful, almost familiar. She opened it with trembling fingers. "Dear Miss Hayes, you probably don't remember me bringing you cookies that time you visited our house. Dad said I shouldn't bother you, but I saw your face on TV today. You look like how Dad used to look, back when Mom died. Like you're carrying something too heavy by yourself. I know you think you have to fix everything your father did wrong. Dad felt that way too, after his DUI. He thought he had to be perfect to make up for one mistake. But that's not how forgiveness works. Remember that day at the community center? You helped Mrs. Rodriguez get a loan for her flower shop, and you helped Mr. Chin save his restaurant. That wasn't your father, that was you. Dad always says God doesn't expect us to be perfect, just faithful. He had to learn to forgive himself before he could help others. Maybe you do too. If my dad can forgive himself, so can you. Love, Lily Walker P.S. The cookies are peanut butter this time. Dad says they're your favorite." Charlotte's hand shook as she read the letter again. Tears splashed onto the paper, smudging the careful handwriting. She hadn't even noticed the small package that had fallen from the envelope. Inside were 3 slightly crumbled cookies wrapped in wax paper. The sight of those imperfect, homemade cookies, made by a teenage girl who still believed in second chances, broke something open inside Charlotte's chest. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to contain the sob that rose up, but it was no use. Years of maintaining perfect control crumbled like the cookies in her lap. In the growing darkness of her office, Charlotte Hayes, CEO, heiress, and lonely defender of a tarnished legacy, wept as she read aloud the words that cut straight to her heart. If my dad can forgive himself, so can you. The city lights twinkled below, and somewhere in a modest house across town, a young girl waited, hopefully for her letter to reach its mark, believing in the power of grace to heal even the deepest wounds. The sleek black Mercedes seemed out of place on Willow Creek's main street as Charlotte Hayes pulled up to the curb. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by the weight of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. She smoothed her navy blazer, more a habit than necessity, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The small town felt different from the corporate world she'd grown accustomed to. Here, old men nodded hello from park benches, and children rode their bikes freely down sidewalks. No protesters, no news vans, no shareholders demanding answers, just life, simple and genuine. Miller's Auto Repair sat at the end of the block, its faded red brick front honest and unpretentious. Through the open garage door, she could see Ethan bent over an engine, focused entirely on his work. Her heart clenched at the sight of him, this good man who'd saved her life twice now, once from attackers and once from her own isolated existence. "Excuse me," she said softly, stepping into the garage's shadow. Ethan straightened slowly, recognition flickering across his face. He wiped his hands methodically on a shop rag, buying time to compose himself. "Charlotte, could we talk?" She gestured toward May's diner across the street. "Please?" He studied her for a long moment, then nodded to Tommy. "Cover for me for a bit?" The bell above May's door chimed as they entered. The lunch rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing coffee cups. May herself, a silver-haired woman who'd served breakfast here for 30 years, raised an eyebrow at the unlikely pair but led them to a quiet booth by the window. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring 2 cups. "Thank you," Charlotte said, wrapping her manicured fingers around the warm mug. The ceramic was chipped, well used, nothing like the fine china in her office. Somehow, it felt more real. Ethan sat quietly, waiting. His work shirt had a small oil stain on the sleeve, and his hands showed the honest wear of manual labor. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft clink of spoons and murmured conversations from other tables. "I've been thinking about my father," Charlotte finally began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About legacy and truth, and what we owe to others." She took a shaky breath. "The lending practices they're investigating? They're real. My father, he built an empire on discrimination and backroom deals. I found the proof in his private files." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed understanding. Must have been hard to discover that. "The board wants me to bury it, to protect the bank's reputation." Charlotte's laugh held no humor. "They've offered to blame it all on lower-level employees, make it go away with settlements, and PR spin." She straightened her shoulders. "I'm going to expose everything instead." "Everything?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You know what that could cost you?" "The bank, my position, most of my fortune, probably." She met his gaze steadily. "But I keep thinking about what you told me that first day in the garage, about how sometimes doing right means losing everything you thought mattered." "You don't have to destroy yourself to fix his mistakes," Ethan said softly. "Don't I?" Charlotte's fingers tightened around her cup. "There are families who lost homes, dreams, futures because of these policies. How can I keep profiting from that? What kind of redemption would that be?" A truck rumbled past outside, momentarily drowning out the diner's quiet atmosphere. When it passed, Charlotte continued, "I came to tell you first because your opinion matters to me. And because I understand if you want to distance yourself completely from this mess." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying his coffee as if it held answers. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and certain. "You know what I learned after Sarah died? When I hit rock bottom with the drinking?" He rarely spoke of this, but his voice was steady. "Real strength isn't in standing alone. It's in letting others stand with you when you do what's right." Charlotte's breath caught. "You mean, I'm not going anywhere." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering her smooth one. "Whatever comes next, you don't face it alone." Tears pricked at Charlotte's eyes, but she blinked them back. In that moment, no words were needed. Their hands remained clasped across the formica table, 2 souls bound by something deeper than circumstance. The quiet courage of choosing truth over safety, redemption over reputation. May appeared with fresh coffee, pretending not to notice their linked hands or the weight of the moment she'd interrupted. The afternoon sun slanted through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across their booth, but neither moved to break the connection between them. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the highway as Ethan's old pickup truck rumbled down the back roads of Miller County. The engine hummed with the familiar rhythm of a well-maintained machine, a testament to Ethan's skilled hands. Charlotte sat in the passenger seat, her designer blazer traded for a simple blue sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. Her normally perfect hair was slightly tousled by the wind from the cracked window, and for the first time in years, she didn't seem to mind. A stack of manila folders lay between them on the worn bench seat. each one containing stories they needed to hear, stories that would either save them or bury them deeper. "The Hendersons are first on the list," Charlotte said, checking her notes one more time. Her voice carried a nervous edge that hadn't been there in boardrooms or corporate meetings. "They almost lost their farm 3 years ago. According to the files, my father's bank, nearly foreclosed on them." Ethan nodded, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. The truck responded to his touch like an old friend, taking the curves of the country road with practiced ease. "Good folks. Tom Henderson helped me rebuild my transmission when I couldn't afford the parts. Wouldn't take a dime for his labor either." He glanced at Charlotte, noting how she was really listening, not just waiting for her turn to speak. That's the thing about small towns. We remember who was there during the hard times, and we remember who wasn't. The truck turned onto a gravel road that stretched between fields of swaying corn. Dust kicked up behind them, creating a small cloud that drifted lazily in the morning air. Charlotte watched the countryside roll by, so different from her world of glass towers and steel facades. Here, the landscape told stories of seasons and generations, of families who'd worked the same soil for decades. "I need to understand," she said softly, almost to herself, "not just the numbers on spreadsheets, but the people behind them, the lives those numbers represent." They pulled up to a weathered farmhouse that had clearly seen better days, but was lovingly maintained. Paint peeled from the shutters, but the porch was swept clean and decorated with pots of autumn mums. Tom Henderson was already waiting on the porch, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Ethan climbing from the truck. But his eyes held unmistakable caution when they fell on Charlotte, sizing her up with the practiced gaze of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "Tom?" Ethan called out, his voice carrying the easy warmth of old friendship. "Thanks for seeing us on such short notice." "Anything for you, Ethan," Tom replied, though his gaze never left Charlotte. "Ma'am." Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen smelled of coffee and fresh bread. Family photos covered every available surface, wedding pictures, school graduations, harvest celebrations spanning generations. Over coffee served in chipped but clean mugs, the Hendersons shared their story with quiet dignity. How the bank under Charlotte's father's leadership had suddenly changed the terms of their loan without warning. How they'd nearly lost the century-old family farm that had been in Tom's family since his great-grandfather cleared the land by hand. How a last-minute loan from a local credit union, secured with help from neighbors like Ethan, had saved them from losing everything. Charlotte listened intently, her manicured hands wrapped around the simple mug, absorbing every painful detail. She didn't interrupt or offer excuses. She just listened, and with each word, something inside her seemed to shift and realign. "I'm so sorry," she said when they finished, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to make this right. I don't know how yet, but I will." They visited 3 more families that day, each stop adding another layer to Charlotte's understanding of the damage her father's policies had caused. A widow named Sarah Willis, who'd almost lost her home after medical bills from her husband's cancer treatment piled up faster than she could pay them. A young couple, the Patels, whose small business loan had been repeatedly denied, despite perfect credit and a solid business plan. A retired teacher, Miss Eleanor, whose pension had been mismanaged by the bank's investment division, leaving her struggling to afford her medications. At each stop, Charlotte took careful notes, her elegant handwriting filling page after page with details that would never appear in any corporate report. Names, faces, dreams, deferred or destroyed. Ethan watched her transform with each story, her corporate armor cracking piece by piece, revealing the compassionate woman who'd been buried beneath years of business school training and boardroom battles. By late afternoon, they found themselves in Milton, a town even smaller than Willow Creek. Main Street consisted of barely a dozen buildings, half of them empty. The local diner was nearly deserted when they stopped for a late lunch. Just a few farmers nursing coffee and discussing the weather in the low voices of people who'd known each other their entire lives. "You're doing good work," Ethan said quietly, watching Charlotte organize her notes with the same precision she'd once applied to merger documents. "Most people in your position wouldn't bother. They'd send a deputy or hire a consulting firm." Charlotte looked up from her papers, her eyes tired but somehow more alive than they'd been in years. "I kept telling myself the system worked. That if people failed, it was their own fault for not trying hard enough or not being smart enough." She shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "I was so wrong. So completely, arrogantly wrong. Their next stop was the Rodriguez family's auto parts store, a small operation that barely qualified as more than a garage with dreams. Maria Rodriguez met them at the door, her face lighting up when she recognized Charlotte from the newspaper photos. Her teenage son, Miguel, stood beside her, ready to translate as his mother described in rapid Spanish how Charlotte's new community lending policies had transformed their small business. Before, no bank would even look at our application. Miguel translated while Maria spoke with passionate gestures. They said we were too high risk, that auto parts stores failed too often, but your community lending program, it changed everything. We hired 3 more people last month, and Mom's talking about opening a second location. Charlotte's eyes welled up as Maria stepped forward and hugged her fiercely, speaking in broken English about second chances and the American dream. Outside, walking back to the truck under the fading afternoon sun, Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring that she'd smudged her makeup. "That's what banking should be," she said, her voice barely steady. "Not just chasing profits and quarterly reports, but people helping people build better lives." As sunset approached, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, they made their final stop at the Miller County Fairgrounds. Local families had gathered for their weekly community dinner, a tradition that had started during the Depression and somehow survived into the modern age. Someone had built a bonfire in the center of the field, and the autumn air was filled with the sounds of children playing tag between the picnic tables and adults sharing news and gossip in the easy way of people who'd grown up together. Ethan and Charlotte found themselves sitting on a log near the fire, watching the flames dance and spark. The day's testimonies lay in folders beside them, each one a story of struggle, resilience, and hope that couldn't be captured in any spreadsheet or annual report. "I used to think success was numbers," Charlotte said softly, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire and distant laughter. "Market share, profit margins, stock prices. Turns out it's names. Tom Henderson, Maria Rodriguez, Sarah Willis." She paused, watching a young father push his daughter on a makeshift swing tied to an old oak tree. Real people with real lives, real dreams that matter more than any quarterly earnings report. The firelight flickered across their faces as families gathered around them, sharing stories and passing plates of home-cooked food that no 5-star restaurant could match. Someone had brought out a guitar, and soft folk songs drifted through the evening air. Children roasted marshmallows while their parents discussed everything from crop yields to school board elections. In that moment, surrounded by the simple warmth of community, the distance between the banking heiress and the small-town mechanic seemed to disappear entirely, replaced by a shared understanding of what truly mattered in life. The marble steps of Hayes Community Bank headquarters felt colder than usual on this crisp autumn morning. Charlotte Hayes stood at the podium, her hand steady on its wooden edges despite the flutter in her stomach. Camera flashes sparked like lightning across her face. Behind her, Ethan Walker's solid presence gave her strength, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he stood guard. The sea of reporters stretched across the plaza, their notepads and microphones raised like weapons. Charlotte drew a deep breath, remembering all the stories they'd gathered over the past weeks, stories of struggle, hope, and redemption. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Today, I stand before you not as the CEO of Hayes Community Banks, but as someone who has learned hard truths about legacy and responsibility." The crowd hushed, pens poised. Charlotte glanced back at Ethan, who gave her a slight nod. His eyes held the same quiet strength she'd seen that first night in the alley. "My father built this institution on what appeared to be solid principles," she continued, "but appearances can hide painful realities. Through recent investigations, I've discovered systematic discrimination in our lending practices dating back decades. Families in struggling neighborhoods were denied loans despite meeting qualifications. Small businesses in minority communities faced impossible interest rates. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A reporter shouted, "Are you admitting to illegal practices, Miss Hayes?" Charlotte's fingers tightened on the podium. "I'm admitting to moral failures. My father's policies hurt people, real people, with dreams and dignity. People like Sarah Martinez, who lost her family restaurant because our bank denied her a fair refinancing option. Like James Wilson, whose construction company was forced into bankruptcy because of predatory rates." She pulled out a thick folder, its edges worn from constant handling. "In this file are hundreds of stories we've gathered. Stories of families who deserve better from us. I've spent the past weeks traveling with Mr. Walker, listening to these voices firsthand. The cameras turned to Ethan, who stood straighter but kept his eyes forward. A voice called out, "Is this the same man with the DUI record?" "Yes," Charlotte answered firmly. "The same man who saved my life without knowing who I was. The same man who taught me that redemption isn't about hiding our past, it's about facing it, honestly, and working to make things right." More shouts erupted. "What about shareholder interests? Will you step down? How will this affect stock prices?" Charlotte raised her hand for quiet. "Starting today, Hayes Community Banks will undergo complete restructuring. We're establishing a $50 million restitution fund for families affected by past discrimination. We're converting several branches into community-owned cooperatives, with local boards making lending decisions." The plaza erupted in chaos. Some reporters pressed forward aggressively, while others turned to their phones, frantically typing. In the back, Charlotte spotted familiar faces, some of the families they'd interviewed, nodding in approval. "Miss Hayes!" A young reporter pushed to the front. "Won't these changes destroy your father's legacy?" Charlotte felt Ethan step closer, his presence steady behind her. "My father's legacy was built on profit at any cost. I choose to build a new legacy, one of transparency, equality, and genuine community service." She straightened her shoulders. "The true measure of a bank isn't its stock price, but its impact on people's lives." The crowd surged forward, questions flying like arrows. "What about the board's opposition? Are you prepared for lawsuits? Will the Walker Fund be reinstated?" Ethan moved beside her now, his arm creating a barrier as cameras pressed closer. For a moment, Charlotte was back in that dark alley, frightened but not alone. This time, though, they faced the chaos together, by choice. "The Walker Fund will not only be reinstated," she announced over the din, but expanded. "Because sometimes the people who understand struggle best are the ones who've lived through it." More shouting, more flashes. A security team moved in as the crowd grew more aggressive. Charlotte felt Ethan's hand on her elbow, gentle but firm, guiding her back. "One more question," voices demanded. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Walker." But Ethan had already shifted into protective mode, his broad shoulders creating a path through the press of bodies. Just like that first night, he led her to safety, this time from a storm of their own making. As they reached the building's entrance, Charlotte heard scattered applause from the community members in the crowd. "Mrs. Martinez's voice rang out clear. "God bless you, Miss Hayes. Thank you for listening." The heavy glass doors closed behind them, muffling the chaos outside. Security guards took up positions as Ethan's hand dropped from her elbow. The marble lobby felt like a sanctuary after the barrage of questions and cameras. "You did good out there," Ethan said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with pride and something deeper understanding. Charlotte smoothed her blazer, her hands finally allowing themselves a small tremor. "We did good," she corrected. "I couldn't have faced this alone." Through the glass doors, they could see the crowd still churning, reporters doing live stand-ups, photographers angling for better shots. But between their faces, Charlotte caught glimpses of the community members, small business owners, families, workers, gathering in supportive groups, talking animatedly about what they'd heard. Those were the voices that mattered now. Those were the people who would help write the next chapter of Hayes Community Bank's story, not from boardrooms and corner offices, but from the heart of the communities they served. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ethan's small auto shop as he wiped his hands on a red shop rag. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal hung in the air while he bent over the engine of an old Chevrolet pickup. The truck belonged to Jim Martinez, a local veteran who'd been struggling to make ends meet since returning from overseas. Charlotte stood quietly in the doorway, her elegant blazer a stark contrast to the workshop's worn walls. She watched as Ethan's skilled hands moved with purpose, checking connections and adjusting parts with practiced ease. "That should do it, Jim," Ethan said, closing the hood with a gentle thud. "New timing belt, oil change, and I fixed that transmission leak that was giving you trouble." Jim, a man in his 30s with tired eyes but a grateful smile, reached for his worn leather wallet. "What do I owe you, Ethan?" "Put that away," Ethan said firmly, raising his hand. "Consider it a thank you for your service." Jim's eyes grew misty. "I can't let you do that. Times are tough for everyone." "He's right." Charlotte stepped forward, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. "And soon, if you need help getting back on your feet, Hayes Community Banks will have a special program for veterans, local managers who understand their community's needs. Jim looked between them, recognition dawning on his face as he spotted Charlotte. "You're the bank owner from the news," he said. "The one who's changing everything." Charlotte nodded, a gentle smile crossing her face. "We're restructuring. Each branch will be partly owned and operated by people who live in their communities, people who know their neighbors." Word of the changes at Hayes Banks had started spreading through town like wildfire. The morning papers carried headlines about the revolutionary shift in banking. Hayes Banks to pioneer community-based banking model. Social media buzzed with positive reactions, especially from small business owners and families who'd struggled with traditional banking. "My cousin in Millbrook said their branch manager actually came to his house," Jim said, leaning against his truck, "sat at his kitchen table and helped him refinance his mortgage. Said no one had ever done that before." Ethan wiped down his tools, listening to the conversation with quiet pride. He'd seen firsthand how Charlotte's decision to restructure had begun healing old wounds. The public's anger had started shifting to understanding, then to admiration for her courage in admitting past wrongs and working to fix them. "It's what banking should have been all along," Charlotte said, running her hand along the workbench. "My father forgot that money isn't just numbers on a page. It's people's dreams, their children's futures." The shop door chimed as Lily burst in, her backpack bouncing against her shoulder, her face glowing with excitement. "Dad, Charlotte! You won't believe what just happened." She pulled an envelope from her bag, the Hayes Community Bank logo crisp in the corner. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it out. "The Walker Fund, it's back, and they're offering me a full scholarship for college." Ethan froze, his shop rag falling forgotten to the floor. Charlotte stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The new board voted this morning," Charlotte explained softly. "The Walker Fund was the first program they wanted to reinstate. They said it represented everything the bank should stand for." Lily threw her arms around her father, the letter crumpling slightly between them. Ethan held her tight, his throat too tight for words. After a moment, she reached out and pulled Charlotte into their embrace. Jim watched the scene with a warm smile, then quietly slipped into his truck. The engine purred to life, Ethan's handiwork evident in its smooth sound. As he pulled away, the setting sun painted the shop in shades of gold, its light catching the tears on their cheeks. "Thank you," Lily whispered, still holding them both. "Both of you." Ethan finally found his voice. "Your mom would be so proud of you, sweetheart. So proud." Through the shop window, they could see neighbors walking past, waving and smiling. The sight of Charlotte Hayes in the local auto shop no longer drew suspicious stares or whispered comments. Instead, there was a growing sense of respect, of community, of healing. The scholarship letter lay on Ethan's workbench, its official letterhead catching the last rays of sunlight. The Walker Fund logo stood bold against the paper, a bridge spanning troubled waters, a symbol of hope restored. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves as Charlotte's car pulled up to the now familiar alley where everything had begun. The space looked different in daylight, less threatening, more full of possibility. She stepped out, her casual weekend attire a change from her usual corporate suits, and waited for Ethan to arrive. Minutes later, his old pickup truck rumbled around the corner. Charlotte smiled, remembering how far they'd come since that fateful night. Ethan parked and walked over, his weathered work boots crunching on scattered gravel. "You said you had something to show me?" he asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Charlotte pulled out a rolled blueprint from her messenger bag. "Actually, I have something to ask you." She spread the papers across the hood of her car, weighing down the corners with small stones. "What do you see?" Ethan leaned in, studying the architectural drawings. His eyes widened as he recognized the location. This alley? These plans? A community center?" Charlotte finished for him, with a workshop space, counseling rooms, job training facilities, and a youth center. She turned to face him fully. "I want you to help me build it. Not just the building, but the program itself. Co-found it with me." Ethan ran his hand along the edge of the blueprint, tracing the outline of what could be. "Charlotte, I don't know anything about running a center like this." "But you know everything about helping people," she countered. "You've been doing it your whole life, one person at a time. This is just scaling up what comes naturally to you." As they discussed the possibilities, a small crowd began to gather. Word spread quickly in their small town. Tom, one of Ethan's former co-workers from the corporate garage, stepped forward. "I heard you might need some helping hands," he said, gesturing to the group behind him. Several other mechanics nodded, along with local contractors and craftsmen who'd heard about the project. Charlotte watched Ethan's expression soften as more people arrived. Mrs. Peterson from the diner offered to organize meals for the volunteers. The hardware store owner pledged materials at cost. Even two young men, whom Ethan recognized with a start as the same ones who'd attacked Charlotte that night, approached cautiously. We've been doing community service," one of them said, looking at his feet. "Would like to help make this right, if you'll let us." Ethan exchanged a glance with Charlotte, who nodded slightly. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said quietly. "God knows I got mine." The planning meeting evolved into an impromptu community gathering. People sat on overturned buckets and leaned against walls, offering suggestions and volunteering their skills. Charlotte watched in amazement as Ethan naturally took charge, his quiet authority drawing people in, organizing their enthusiasm into practical plans. By early afternoon, the first work crews had already begun clearing debris from the alley. The steady rhythm of cooperation filled the air, hammers pounding, shovels scraping, wheelbarrows squeaking. Charlotte stood back, watching Ethan direct traffic with the ease of someone who'd found his true calling. Lily arrived after school, carrying her art supplies. She'd been commissioned to paint a mural on the one remaining wall, the very wall her father had been thrown against during the fight. Now it would showcase something very different. "I've been sketching ideas," she told Charlotte, pulling out her notebook. The design showed hands reaching up toward a rising sun, with the words, "Hope grows here," woven through flowering vines. Charlotte helped Lily set up her painting supplies while Ethan worked with the volunteers. The young artist began outlining her design, her strokes confident and purposeful. People paused in their work occasionally to watch the mural take shape, each color adding life to the once dark alley. As the afternoon wore on, the transformation became more visible. Where broken glass had littered the ground, fresh gravel now crunched underfoot. The wall that had witnessed violence was slowly blooming with color under Lily's careful attention. Ethan took a break from coordinating volunteers to watch his daughter work. Her face showed the same focused expression her mother used to wear when creating something beautiful. He felt Charlotte's presence beside him, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching hope literally take shape before their eyes. Lily stepped back from her work, paintbrush in hand, studying the partially completed mural. The sun's rays were beginning to emerge from her painted horizon, promising a new day. Around them, the sounds of construction and community continued, a symphony of second chances and fresh starts. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the nearly completed community center, its fresh red brick walls standing proud where darkness had once ruled. Construction workers moved with purpose, carrying supplies and checking measurements, their tool belts jingling as they worked to finish the final details. Charlotte Hayes stood at the entrance, her hand resting on the smooth wooden handrail of the new steps. She wore a simple cream sweater and jeans, a far cry from her old power suits. The past few months had changed her in ways no designer outfit could show. Her eyes held a warmth that hadn't been there before, and her smile came more easily now. Beside her, Ethan Walker checked his watch, his weathered hands still bearing traces of motor oil from his morning at the shop. "News crew should be here any minute," he said, tugging self-consciously at his clean work shirt. "You sure about this?" "As sure as I was that day I found you in that cell," Charlotte replied, her voice gentle. "Some stories need telling." A van with the local station's logo pulled up to the curb. A small crew emerged, led by a reporter in a neat blazer. They carried cameras and sound equipment, moving with practiced efficiency. "Miss Hayes, Mr. Walker," the reporter greeted them warmly. "Thank you for having us. We've been following this story since the beginning, but seeing it all come together like this." She gestured at the building behind them. "God's timing," Ethan said simply, sharing a knowing look with Charlotte. The crew set up their equipment while curious onlookers gathered across the street. Several of Ethan's regular customers waved, and a group of teenagers, some of whom had been helped by the Walker Fund, stopped to watch. Rolling in 3, 2, 1, the cameraman signaled. "We're here at the site of what was once just another forgotten alley in downtown," the reporter began, "now transformed into the Hayes Walker Community Center. With me are Charlotte Hayes, former CEO of Hayes Community Banks, and Ethan Walker, the mechanic whose act of courage sparked an unlikely friendship and a movement of change. Miss Hayes, what made you choose this location?" Charlotte's eyes drifted to the spot where she'd first met Ethan. This alley represented fear and darkness. Now it stands for hope and second chances. Sometimes the places that hurt us most become the foundation for healing others. Mr. Walker, you went from being arrested here to helping build this center. How does that feel? Ethan shifted his weight, never comfortable in the spotlight. Makes me think about how God works. One minute you're just trying to do the right thing, the next you're part of something bigger than yourself. The center will offer job training, addiction recovery support, and financial education, Charlotte added. We wanted to create a place where people don't have to choose between dignity and asking for help. The camera panned across the building's facade, capturing the mural Lily had painted, a sunrise breaking through storm clouds, with the words "Hope Rises" flowing through the rays of light. There's been talk about redemption throughout this story, the reporter continued. Both of you faced public scrutiny and private battles. What would you say to others struggling to rebuild their lives? Ethan's voice grew steady, finding strength in the truth he'd lived. Shame tells you to hide. Pride tells you to go it alone. But real healing? That happens in community. Every person who walks through these doors will know they're not alone anymore. Charlotte nodded, her eyes bright. We learned that success isn't measured in dollars or headlines. It's measured in changed lives, in second chances given and received, in the courage to start over. The interview continued as they walked through the center, showing off the computer lab, the counseling rooms, the workshop space where Ethan would teach basic car maintenance. Every room held a story of transformation. And the partnership between you two? The reporter asked. It's quite remarkable given your different backgrounds. Charlotte glanced at Ethan, their shared journey written in the easy way they moved in sync. Faith doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. Neither does friendship. Sometimes the people who understand you best are the ones who've walked through their own valleys. We're just ordinary folks trying to follow where God leads. Ethan added, his humility genuine. Charlotte taught me that everyone's got something to give, even when they think they're empty. As the crew packed up their equipment, the afternoon light streamed through the center's windows, painting warm rectangles on the new floors. Charlotte and Ethan stood in comfortable silence, watching the last worker attach the building's sign. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves outside, and Ethan's voice carried the wonder of a man still amazed by grace. Funny how God's biggest miracles start in alleys. The spring breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and newly planted flowers as crowds gathered in front of the Grace Center. Paper streamers in blue and gold, the colors Lily had chosen, danced from lampposts along the walkway, creating ribbons of joy against the clear morning sky. The cheerful banners she'd painted by hand proclaimed "Welcome Home" and "New Beginnings" in her careful script. Folding chairs filled the courtyard in neat rows, with townspeople filing in wearing their Sunday best, their faces bright with anticipation and pride. Children darted between the chairs, their laughter mixing with the gentle murmur of excited conversations. Ethan Walker stood off to the side near the memorial garden, tugging at his tie and shifting uncomfortably in his pressed khakis. He'd argued against wearing the formal clothes, insisting his work boots and jeans would be fine, but Lily had insisted with the gentle stubbornness she'd inherited from her mother. "It's your big day too, Dad," she'd said while helping him knot the burgundy tie that morning, her fingers patient and sure as she adjusted the knot just right. "You deserve to look as important as you are." Now, watching the growing crowd of familiar faces, people whose cars he'd fixed, whose groceries he'd helped carry, whose troubles he'd quietly eased over the years, he was glad she'd won that battle. Charlotte Hayes stepped onto the small wooden platform they'd set up for the occasion, her heels clicking softly against the weathered boards. Sunlight caught the silver threads in her navy blazer as she approached the podium, and the gentle breeze stirred her carefully styled hair. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, the nervous energy of the moment evident in the way she gripped the wooden edges of the podium. But when she spoke, her voice rang clear and strong, carrying across the courtyard with the confidence of someone who'd found her true purpose. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today." She paused, taking a steadying breath as her eyes swept across the sea of familiar faces. Today marks more than just the opening of a building. This center represents what happens when we choose grace over judgment, hope over fear, and community over isolation. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner bakery dabbed her eyes with a crumpled tissue, her weathered hands shaking slightly with emotion. Next to her, Tom Fletcher, the veteran whose transmission Ethan had rebuilt for free last winter, nodded solemnly, his calloused fingers whirring the brim of his baseball cap. Even some of the construction workers who'd volunteered their time to help build the center stood at attention near the back, their hard hats held respectfully against their chests, still bearing traces of the honest sweat they'd poured into this project. "We're calling it the Grace Center," Charlotte continued, her voice growing steadier with each word, "because grace is what brought us here. Grace is what gave a second chance to a banker who'd lost her way in boardrooms and profit margins." She smiled softly, the expression transforming her usually serious features. "Grace is what moved a mechanic to help a stranger in an alley, even when it cost him dearly. Grace is what taught us all that redemption isn't just possible, it's promised to anyone brave enough to reach for it." Ethan shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncomfortable with the attention but steady in his conviction that this moment mattered more than his discomfort. The warmth of the spring sun on his shoulders reminded him of countless mornings working in his garage, never imagining his life would lead to this. Lily, standing beside him in her flowered spring dress, the one they'd picked out together at the department store, her first grown-up dress for her first grown-up speech, squeezed his arm proudly. Her touch grounded him, reminded him that he wasn't standing here alone. This center will provide job training for those seeking new skills, counseling for families in crisis, childcare for working parents, and a safe space for anyone who needs a fresh start. Charlotte's voice grew stronger with each promise, each commitment they'd spent months planning and preparing for, because everyone deserves the chance to rebuild, to be forgiven, to find their way home to the person they're meant to be. She gestured to Lily with an encouraging smile, and the teenager straightened her shoulders with visible determination. As she walked to the podium, her long brown hair caught the breeze, and for a heart-stopping moment, she looked so much like her mother that Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The same gentle confidence, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, the same grace in her movements that had first captured his heart 20 years ago. Lily unfolded a piece of paper covered in her neat handwriting, then surprised everyone by tucking it away in her dress pocket. She chose instead to speak from her heart, her young voice carrying with unexpected strength across the silent courtyard. "When I was little," she began, her fingers gripping the edges of the podium, "I thought heroes were like the ones in movies, perfect people who never made mistakes, who always knew the right thing to do." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, parents recognizing the innocent wisdom of childhood. "But my dad taught me something different. He taught me that heroes aren't born perfect. They're forgiven, and then they choose to do better." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and hard-won wisdom. Ethan blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. His daughter's courage, her willingness to share their story, humbled him more than any recognition ever could. "See, my dad messed up pretty bad after my mom died." Lily's voice wavered but held strong, each word carefully chosen and deeply felt. "He got lost for a while in grief and anger and bottles that promised to make the pain go away. But he never stopped trying to find his way back to me, back to the man my mom fell in love with. And when he did find his way, he didn't just fix himself. He started fixing everything and everyone he could reach with his two hands and his big heart." In the crowd, several heads nodded with recognition and respect. People who'd benefited from Ethan's quiet generosity over the years. Elderly neighbors whose cars he'd maintained for free. Single mothers whose broken appliances he'd repaired without being asked. Teenagers he'd taught basic mechanics to keep them off the streets. Exchanged knowing looks and grateful smiles. And Miss Hayes? Lily turned to smile at Charlotte with genuine affection. She could have hidden behind her money and power when things got hard. She could have blamed other people for her company's mistakes. Instead, she chose to face hard truths and make things right, even when it cost her everything she thought mattered. That's what real heroes do. They show us it's okay to fall, as long as we help each other get back up again. The applause started soft and uncertain, then swelled until it filled the courtyard like a wave of appreciation and hope. People rose to their feet, clapping not just for the words, but for the courage it took to speak them. Charlotte stepped forward with the ceremonial scissors, their brass handles gleaming in the sunlight, polished to perfection for this moment they'd all worked toward. "Would you do the honors?" she asked quietly, holding them out to Ethan with hands that no longer trembled. Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed by the gesture but certain of his response. "Together," he said, his voice rough with emotion and thick with the weight of all they'd been through. "All three of us. That's how we got here." They stood before the blue ribbon, Charlotte, Ethan, and Lily, three people whose lives had been broken in different ways, now standing united in purpose. Their hands joined on the scissors, warm fingers intertwining in a moment of perfect unity. Together, they cut through the silk ribbon that had been tied with such care that morning. The ribbon fluttered to the ground like a blessing as cheers erupted from every corner of the courtyard. People began flowing into the center, their voices rising in excitement and wonder as they discovered each carefully planned space. They exclaimed over the bright rooms painted in welcoming yellows and greens, the computer lab equipped with donated machines and high-speed internet, the daycare area with its cheerful murals depicting children of all colors playing together under rainbow skies. Lily's artwork graced several walls throughout the building, telling stories of hope and redemption in vibrant colors that seemed to glow with inner light. Through it all, Ethan remained on the steps, taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction and overwhelming gratitude. Children already played on the new playground equipment while their parents chatted nearby, their voices mixing with laughter and the sounds of community being born. Elderly neighbors rested on benches dedicated to local heroes, teachers, veterans, volunteers who'd given their lives to service. The whole space hummed with life and possibility, with the promise of second chances and new beginnings. Charlotte made her way back to him through the crowd, accepting congratulations and handshakes, but moving with purpose toward the man who'd changed everything. She stood close beside him on the steps, their shoulders almost touching as they watched their shared dream become living, breathing reality. The spring sun warmed their faces, chasing away the last shadows of that dark alley where their story had begun with fear and violence and the simple choice to do what was right. She turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy and relief and something deeper than gratitude. Her fingers found his, intertwining naturally as if they'd been meant to fit together all along. The simple touch spoke of friendship tested by fire, of trust rebuilt one choice at a time, of two broken people who'd found healing in helping others heal. "You didn't just save me that night," she whispered, squeezing his hand as family streamed around them into their center of grace. "You saved us all." The setting sun painted the sky in magnificent strokes of amber and rose, casting long, golden shadows across the newly laid pavers of the Grace Center's sprawling courtyard. Each brick had been placed with care by volunteers from the community, their names etched into a small commemorative plaque near the main entrance. Ethan Walker sat on one of the sturdy wooden benches they'd installed just last week, his calloused, work-worn hands resting peacefully on his knees. The bench bore a small brass nameplate, in memory of Sarah Walker, who believed in second chances. To his right, Charlotte Hayes had settled into a comfortable, companionable silence, her usual crisp business attire replaced by soft casual slacks and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. The transformation from the polished CEO he'd first met to this warm, genuine woman never ceased to amaze him. On his left, Lily leaned against his broad shoulder with the easy affection of a daughter who'd never doubted her father's love, exactly as she used to do when she was little and the world felt too big and scary. The joyful sound of children's laughter rang out crystal clear from the playground behind the center, mixing with the gentle evening breeze that rustled through the oak trees they'd planted along the perimeter. A group of kids chased each other in an endless game of tag around the bright red swings their fathers had helped install over the weekend, their voices rising and falling like music. Their pure, uninhibited joy echoed off the warm brick walls of the center, a sound that seemed to wash away years of pain and doubt. "Listen to that," Charlotte said softly, her dark eyes crinkling at the corners as she watched the children play. 6 months ago, this was just an empty lot filled with weeds and bad memories. Nothing but broken glass and graffiti. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind drifting back to that fateful night in the alley. The terror in Charlotte's eyes as those men cornered her, the cold bite of metal handcuffs against his wrists, the endless hours in that cramped holding cell wondering if Lily would ever forgive him for failing her again. It all felt like scenes from another lifetime, distant and faded. "Amazing how things change when people decide to believe in something better," he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. A little girl with bouncing pigtails and grass stains on her yellow dress ran past them, clutching a painted rock from the butterfly garden Lily had designed and helped plant. Her mother called after her from the center's open doorway, her voice warm with love and gentle concern. "Careful, sweetie, don't trip on those loose stones." Lily smiled, watching the scene unfold with the contentment of someone who'd found her place in the world. "Remember when I used to run like that, Dad? Full speed ahead without looking where I was going? Mom would always say the exact same thing, every single time." "She sure did." Ethan's throat tightened with emotion, but the memory brought warmth instead of the sharp pain it once carried. Your mother would have absolutely loved this place. She always said the best way to heal a broken heart was to help heal someone else's. Charlotte shifted slightly on the bench, her shoulder brushing against his in a gesture that had become natural and comforting over these past months. "Tell me about that night," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you first saw those guys in the alley cornering me, were you scared?" Ethan took a deep breath, watching the last golden rays of sunlight glint off the center's tall windows like captured fire. "Terrified," he admitted without hesitation, "but not of them, not really. I was scared of failing again, of making another mistake that would hurt the people I loved. After Sarah died, after my drinking got so bad I couldn't see straight, after that DUI that nearly cost me everything." He shook his head, remembering those dark days when each morning felt like climbing a mountain. "I'd promised myself, promised Lily, that I'd never let her down again. And there I was, about to get involved in something that could have taken me away from her forever. But you helped anyway," Charlotte said, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "Sometimes doing the right thing means being scared out of your mind and doing it anyway," Lily chimed in, quoting words Ethan had told her countless times during their hardest moments. "That's what real courage looks like." A group of teenagers crossed the courtyard, their backpacks slung over their shoulders as they headed for the state-of-the-art computer lab Charlotte had insisted on including in the center's design. One of them was Marcus, the boy who'd helped paint the beautiful mural on the east wall, the same kid who'd once been caught stealing parts from the auto shop to sell for drug money. Now he volunteered at the center 3 afternoons a week, teaching younger kids basic computer skills and showing them that their past mistakes didn't have to define their future. "Look at that," Ethan said, nodding toward Marcus as the boy held the door open for an elderly woman carrying groceries from the center's food pantry. "Second chances everywhere you look. Kids who were written off by everyone else, finding out they matter." Charlotte's hand found his, warm and steady and real. "That's what this place is really about. What you taught me about. That everybody deserves a chance to start over, to become who they were meant to be." Ethan turned to look at her fully, remembering how different she'd seemed that first day in her imposing corporate office. All polished surfaces, careful words, and invisible walls built to keep the world at arm's length. Now her face was open and genuine, marked by the same grace she'd learned to give freely to others. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. "You know what's funny?" Lily said, sitting up straighter and tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Everyone keeps talking about how Dad saved you that night, Charlotte. The newspapers, the TV reporters, everyone acts like it was this big, heroic moment." She gestured broadly at the center, at the families enjoying the peaceful evening, at the warm lights starting to twinkle on in the windows like earthbound stars. "But really, you kind of saved each other." A little boy with a gap-toothed grin zoomed past on his bright blue scooter, his father jogging behind him with the patient smile of a man who'd learned to find joy in simple moments. The same father who'd gotten a small business loan from the restructured Hayes Community Bank to start his own landscaping company. The same father who now mentored other struggling families through the center's financial literacy program, showing them that dreams weren't just for other people. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Ethan murmured, feeling the profound truth of those words settle deep in his bones like an answered prayer. The brilliant sunset had faded to a soft, dusty purple, but warmth still radiated from the pavers beneath their feet, holding the day's sunshine like a blessing. Charlotte squeezed his hand gently, her touch conveying more than words ever could. "When my father died," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I thought I had to carry his legacy exactly as he left it. Every tradition, every policy, every cold business practice. I never imagined that honoring his memory might mean doing things completely differently. That breaking it down would build something so much better," Ethan finished, understanding flooding his voice. She nodded, watching as more lights came on inside the center's many rooms. The windows glowed like welcome beacons in the growing dusk, pushing back the darkness with their warm, golden light. Through the large plate glass windows, they could see people moving about with purpose and hope. Young mothers in the evening skills training class, learning to use computers. Silver-haired seniors teaching restless teenagers the patient art of knitting. A veteran support group sharing coffee and conversation around a circle of mismatched chairs. Lily stood up gracefully, brushing off her jeans and stretching like a cat in the sunshine. "I'm going to help Miss Rodriguez with the evening art class," she announced, pressing a tender kiss to her father's weathered cheek. "The kids are making murals about their dreams tonight. Love you, Dad. Love you too, Charlotte." They watched her go. Her confident stride and bright smile, so different from the uncertain little girl who'd once cried herself to sleep, missing her mother and worrying about her father's pain. Pride swelled in Ethan's chest, pure and clean and overwhelming. Pride not just in who she'd become, but in the journey they'd all taken together. Charlotte rested her head against his strong shoulder, a gesture so natural and right it felt like they'd known each other forever instead of just these few transformative months. "You did good with her, Ethan. Really, really good. She's going to change the world someday." "We all did good here," he replied quietly, his gaze encompassing the entire center and all it represented. The lights from within spilled out onto the courtyard in warm pools, pushing back the darkness and creating spaces where hope could take root and grow. Inside those walls, people who once would have passed each other on the street without a glance now shared stories, skills, meals, and the precious gift of second chances. The walls that had once witnessed nothing but fear and violence now echoed with laughter, learning, and the sound of lives being rebuilt one small step at a time. A commercial airplane blinked steadily across the darkening sky, its lights twinkling like a moving star, the same sky Ethan had looked up at during all those long, lonely nights, asking God for strength for just one more day, for wisdom to be the father Lily deserved. But now, instead of endless darkness, that sky was filled with real stars beginning to emerge, each one twinkling with the light of answered prayers and unexpected grace. "Maybe," Ethan said softly, his voice full of wonder and gratitude, "this is exactly what redemption looks like. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you rewrite the ending." If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Walker, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.